America's first terrorists, the rise of the KKK, the Civil War had ended. But peace never truly came. In 1865, in the small town of Pulaski, Tennessee, bitter ex-Confederates gathered in secret. What began as a club of defeated soldiers quickly mutated into something darker, a white supremacist army. Determined to erase the Union's victory, they called themselves the Ku Klux Klan. Cloaked in ghostly robes, they rode at night, spreading terror across the South. They whipped, tortured, and lynched freedmen who dared to vote. They burned schools and churches to the ground. They hunted down Republican officials and assassinated them in cold blood. By the late 1860s, the Klan had unleashed the nation's first homegrown terrorist campaign. Thousands of black men and women were murdered, not only for claiming their rights, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, but simply for daring to exist with dignity. Union veterans became marked men. In North Carolina, Wyatt Outlaw, a black town councilman and former soldier, was dragged from his home and hanged. In South Carolina, Jim Williams, once enslaved, now a militia captain, was lynched for organizing his people to defend themselves. The Klan thrived in the shadows, preying on the defenseless. But soon they would discover that not everyone feared the hood. Birth of the Buffalo Soldiers, a new army of black veterans. As the smoke of the Civil War cleared and the South bled from defeat, the nation faced a question: what would freedom look like for 4 million newly emancipated men and women? While the Ku Klux Klan plotted in the shadows, the United States Army took a bold step in the open. In July of 1866, Congress passed legislation to create 6 new all-black regiments: the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 38th through 41st Infantry. For the first time in American history, black men were written permanently into the structure of the peacetime army. The men who filled these ranks were not ordinary recruits. Many were veterans who had worn the Union blue through the crucible of war, men who had marched through mud and blood from Antietam to Appomattox, Tix. Others were newly freed men, some barely months removed from slavery, now seizing their chance to stand as soldiers of the United States. They were led by white officers. They were given worn-out uniforms, second-hand rifles, and tired horses, but what they lacked in resources they made up for in grit. These soldiers had already endured a lifetime of hardship. They knew that every mission, every patrol, every battle was birth of the Buffalo Soldiers. More than just duty, it was proof that black men had a rightful place in the heart of the Republic. On the frontier, that proof would soon be written in legend. The American West was vast, unforgiving, and violent. Wagon trains rolled through endless plains, settlers carved out towns, railroads cut steel paths across deserts, and in this cauldron, the Buffalo Soldiers became the thin line between survival and chaos. They guarded supply routes, escorted stagecoaches, protected railroad crews. From raids, they built telegraph lines that stitched a young nation together. They chased down outlaws and faced hostile bands across Montana, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was here that their enemies gave them a name: native warriors struck by their courage, their relentless fighting spirit, and their coarse, woolly hair called them Buffalo Soldiers. To the tribes, the buffalo was sacred, powerful, enduring, untamed, and so the name was no insult. It was a title of respect, a recognition that these men fought with the same ferocity, ferocity, and strength as the great beast of the plains. The soldiers embraced it. To be a Buffalo Soldier meant carrying the burden of proving every single day that black men could fight and die with honor. By the late 1800s, 1 out of every 5 cavalrymen on the frontier was black. Together, they fought in at least 177 engagements of the Indian Wars. Their courage was tested again and again, often against staggering odds. In 1867, fewer than 70 Buffalo Soldiers stood their ground against nearly 900 attackers, a mix of native warriors and bandits. Outnumbered more than 12 to 1, they refused to break. When the smoke cleared, it was the Buffalo Soldiers who still held the field. Their victories were carved into history, not only in the West but in the very idea Of America, the Buffalo Soldiers became a symbol of perseverance, courage, and dignity under fire. But as they built their reputation on the frontier, another battlefield was life on the frontier, and the name Buffalo Soldiers, calling one much closer to home, because while they defended the nation's borders, America's first terrorists were waging war against black freedom in the South, and soon, the Buffalo Soldiers would be called to face them. Confrontation, black soldiers versus the Klan. As the Buffalo Soldiers carved their legend on the frontier, their brothers in arms and fellow veterans faced a different kind of battlefield, the South itself. If there was one thing the Ku Klux Klan feared above all, it was armed black men who had fought for the Union, carried the pride of victory, and refused to bow again. White supremacists understood a hard truth: these soldiers would never return quietly to second-class status, and they were right. Across the Reconstruction South, black Americans organized militias and even volunteer freedmen's rifle clubs to defend their families, schools, and ballot boxes. Many were led by Union veterans who drilled their men with precision and discipline. Their mission was clear: to meet terror with resistance and to avenge the Klan's atrocities with steel and lead. The confrontation was inevitable. In Arkansas, the Klan's night raids grew so violent that Governor Powell Clayton raised a state militia, many of them black troops, to crush the insurrection of 1868. When the governor declared martial law, these men marched into Klan strongholds with rifles and bayonets ready. In one operation, they stormed the town of Center Point and captured 60 Klansmen in a single sweep. That same fall, General Daniel Upham's black militia clashed with Klan guerrillas near Augusta. Shots ripped through the night as the two forces collided. When the smoke cleared, the Klansmen were dead, captured, or scattered in panic. Across Arkansas, similar militia actions led to hundreds of arrests. By early 1869, the Klan and the state had been beaten into silence. Its reign of terror, broken by men it thought it could intimidate. The message was unmistakable: the Night Riders. Confrontation, black soldiers versus the Klan, had finally met opponents who did not run. Meanwhile, the fight escalated to the national stage. Outraged by mounting Klan atrocities, President Ulysses S. Grant unleashed the full power of the federal government. The Enforcement Acts gave him authority to wage war on the invisible empire. In 1871, Grant dispatched 1,000 U.S. soldiers into the very heart of Klan country, South Carolina's upcountry. Leading the charge was Major Lewis Merritt of the 7th Cavalry. His men, hardened veterans, some fresh from the frontier, rode through the dark pine woods hunting Klansmen like outlaws. They raided secret dens, hauled leaders into custody, and shattered the Klan's networks. Within months, hundreds of hooded terrorists had been captured, tried, and imprisoned. The Klan's so-called invisible empire collapsed into dust. Its grand wizard fled into hiding. Its rank-and file deserted or disappeared. By 1872, the original Ku Klux Klan was broken. America had won one of its earliest victories against domestic terrorism, and at the heart of that victory stood black soldiers, from state militias led by freedmen veterans to the Buffalo Soldiers, whose very presence in the U.S. Army sent a message. The defenders of the Union came in all colors. The Klan had set out to terrorize black America, but when confronted by disciplined, battle-tested black men with rifles in hand, it was the Klan that trembled. Legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers' triumphs against America's first terrorists were only the beginning. After Reconstruction, the all-black regiments carried the flag into nearly every conflict the nation faced. On the frontier, they became the backbone of the U.S. cavalry. Through the 1870s and 1880s, they fought in the Indian Wars with relentless discipline and courage. Prejudice dogged their every step, yet on the battlefield they earned respect. 25 Buffalo Soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor during this period, their heroism carved into Army history. By the 1890s, their name had become legend. When war broke out with Spain in 1898, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry were among the first deployed. In Cuba, they stormed. Legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers. The heights of Kettle and San Juan Hills, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Teddy Roosevelt's rough riders, though it was often the Buffalo Soldiers who led the way. At El Caney and Santiago their grit under fire turned the tide. Even President William McKinley praised their role in victory. From Cuba to the Philippines, from chasing Pancho Villa with Pershing in 1916 to serving abroad in World War I, the Buffalo Soldiers proved again and again that patriotism and skill knew no color line. For nearly 90 years, from the ashes of the Civil War to the dawn of World War II, these men fought two battles at once, one against America's enemies overseas and another against the racism they endured at home. Segregated regiments finally ended in 1948 when President Truman ordered the integration of the armed forces, but by then, the Buffalo Soldiers had already carved their legend deep into the nation's story. Their legacy is one of resilience, courage, and defiance. They tamed the frontier, they stood against the night riders of the Klan, they fought for a nation that did not. Closing reflections and lessons for today. Always fight for them, and still they endured. In the end, the Buffalo Soldiers did more than terrify America's first terrorists. They proved that freedom would be defended by those who once had none. The sight of black men in Union blue, rifles in hand, standing tall against lawlessness and hate sent a message across generations: the enemies of liberty could not break them. The Buffalo Soldiers secured their place in history as heroes who upheld the promise of American democracy with unyielding faith, iron discipline, and the courage to face any foe. History at Kursk, where nearly 6,000 armored vehicles clash across the plains. German Tigers and Panthers roar forward, but Soviet defenses are ready. Layers of mines, artillery, and anti-tank guns. The ground shakes for days. When the smoke clears, the German offensive is broken. From that moment, the Wehrmacht begins its long retreat. Villages once occupied by German troops now rise again with Soviet banners. Civilians emerge from hiding, gaunt and silent, witnessing the destruction left behind. Entire towns reduced to ashes, graves scattered across frozen earth. As the Red Army pushes west, new horrors come to light: mass graves, execution pits, and camps where millions have perished. The full scale of Nazi brutality begins to surface, but for the soldiers on the front, there is no time to pause. Ahead lies Ukraine, Belarus, and beyond them the borders of Eastern Europe. By late 1944, the Red Army reaches Poland. The thunder of artillery echoes across the plains. For every mile gained, thousands fall. The Soviet advance is relentless, driven by vengeance and survival. Stalin's forces are moving toward Berlin, and nothing will stop them. But before that final reckoning, another front is opening. In the west, the Allies prepare to strike at Fortress Europe itself. June 6, 1944. 04:30 hours. The English Channel heaves beneath an endless armada of ships, over 5,000 vessels stretching to the horizon. The sea is cold, churning under gray skies, rain sweeping across the waves. Inside the landing craft, soldiers wait in silence, helmets down, rifles clutched tight. The engines drone beneath the sound of distant thunder, not a storm, but the guns of war. Hours earlier, Allied paratroopers had dropped behind enemy lines. In the darkness over Normandy, C-47 transports released thousands of men from the 82nd and 101st Airborne, their parachutes blooming across the night. They land scattered, disoriented, fighting in hedgerows and fields, cutting communication lines, seizing bridges, creating confusion in the German rear. Now as dawn breaks, the invasion begins. Naval guns thunder from battleships offshore, their shells shrieking through the air and smashing into the coastal defenses of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The sky glows with fire and dust. From above, waves of bombers rumble inland, targeting bunkers and artillery. The coast of Normandy disappears in smoke. At 06:30, the first landing craft hit the beaches. Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword, 5 names that will be written into history. The ramps drop and chaos erupts. Machine gun fire tears through the surf. Men stumble forward, falling into the water, their packs dragging them under. The sand becomes a killing ground, covered in smoke and bodies. At Omaha, resistance is brutal. German MG-42s rake the shore from concrete bunkers built into the cliffs. Engineers crawl through explosions to clear mines and obstacles. Medics drag the wounded behind shingle banks while shells burst overhead. Officers shout through the roar, urging men to move. Inch by inch, they climb the bluffs, fighting for every foot of ground. On Utah Beach, currents carry the first waves off course, but luck favors them. The defenses are weaker. General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. lands with the first troops and calmly declares, "We'll start the war from right here." Within hours, the beachhead is secured. By noon, paratroopers link with advancing infantry. Tanks begin rolling ashore from landing craft, treads grinding over steel matting laid on the sand. The Mulberry Harbors, massive artificial ports towed from England, start taking shape behind them. The Allied foothold in France is real, fragile, blood-soaked, but unbreakable. Through the afternoon, German reinforcements rush toward the coast. The 21st Panzer Division counterattacks near Caen, tanks cutting through wheat fields, but Allied aircraft rule the skies now. Thunderbolts and Typhoons dive low, rockets streaking, turning armored columns into burning wrecks. The Luftwaffe barely appears, its strength broken long before. As the day ends, smoke rises across 50 miles of coastline. Nearly 10,000 Allied soldiers lie dead or wounded, but 150,000 men are ashore. Behind them, supply convoys stretch across the channel, bringing more troops, tanks, and fuel every hour. The impossible has been achieved, a beachhead on Fortress Europe. In the days that follow, the battle for Normandy becomes a war within a war. Hedgerow fighting turns every field into a trap. Snipers hide in farmhouses, mortars echo through the valleys, and entire villages are reduced to rubble. Slowly, the Allies push inland toward Caen, toward St. Lo, toward liberation. By late July, the breakout begins. Operation Cobra tears a hole in the German lines. American armored divisions surge forward, French resistance fighters rise from hiding to strike rail lines and convoys. The German front collapses. Within weeks, Paris itself rises in rebellion. August 25, 1944, French tanks roll down the Champs-Élysées. Crowds fill the streets, cheering, weeping, waving flags long hidden under occupation. General Charles de Gaulle walks through the Arc de Triomphe as bells ring across the city. France is free. Yet the war is far from over. To the east, the Red Army continues its relentless march toward the heart of Germany. To the west, the Allies prepare for their final push across the Rhine. The end is coming, but it will not come easily. April 16, 1945. The thunder of artillery shakes the earth along the Oder River. Over 2 million Soviet soldiers wait in the mist, their guns lined wheel to wheel, stretching as far as the eye can see. Before them lies Berlin, Hitler's last fortress, the dying heart of the Third Reich. As dawn breaks, Marshal Zhukov gives the order. The bombardment begins. Thousands of cannons roar at once, the sky turning to flame. The ground trembles, trees snap, and the air fills with choking dust. German positions vanish under the storm of fire. Then through the smoke, the Red Army moves, infantry, tanks, engineers, advancing step by step through the ruins of the Oder front. Inside Berlin, chaos reigns. The once mighty capital of the Reich is now a shattered wasteland. Streets are filled with rubble, buildings burned hollow, and the air reeks of smoke and decay. The last defenders, Hitler Youth, old men of the Volkssturm, remnants of shattered divisions, prepare for a hopeless stand. The SS patrols the streets, executing anyone who talks of surrender. In his underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler sits pale and trembling, staring at maps that no longer matter. The lines on them have collapsed, encircling him like a tightening noose. Generals argue, ministers whisper, but the Führer's reality has drifted beyond saving. Orders still go out, phantom divisions, imaginary armies, but none exist. As the Soviets close in, Berlin becomes a living inferno. The sound of Katyusha rockets screams through the air, echoing between burning buildings. Soviet T-34s rumble down avenues once lined with flags and parades, their treads crushing the bones of a dying empire. Snipers hide in church towers, anti-tank teams lurk in doorways, and every intersection becomes a battlefield. Civilians cower in basements, listening to the battle move from street to street. The air is thick with dust and screams. Water and food are gone, hospitals overflow with the dying. Above ground, soldiers fight with grenades, flamethrowers, and bare hands, the last convulsions of a war that has consumed the world. By April 25, the Soviet and American armies meet at the Elbe River. East and West shake hands, Germany is split, and the end is certain. Yet in Berlin, the fighting rages on. The Red Army encircles the city completely, sealing off all escape. Every hour, Soviet artillery rains destruction closer to the center. April 30th, deep beneath the burning city, Hitler takes his final breath. In the bunker, his loyal aides hear the muffled shot. Above, the flag of the Red Army flutters from the Reichstag, raised by soldiers who have fought from Stalingrad to this very ruin. The swastika is gone, the capital of the Reich has fallen. The streets fall silent except for the crackle of fires and the moan of wind through broken walls. Soviet soldiers move carefully through the ruins, searching for survivors, for enemies, for the end of their long, bloody road. Berlin, once the center of power, is now a graveyard of smoke and stone. A week later, on May 8, 1945, Germany signs its unconditional surrender. Across Europe, church bells ring, crowds fill the streets, and the guns finally fall silent. The war in Europe, the war that began with blitzkrieg and ended in ruin, is over. But beyond the celebrations, the world stares into the shadow left behind, cities in ashes, millions dead, and the truth of what was uncovered in the camps spreading across the globe. The price of victory is revealed not in glory but in silence. March 1945. The Pacific Ocean burns with the fury of 1,000 battles. American fleets now dominate the waves, their carriers covering the horizon. From Saipan to Iwo Jima, island after island has fallen in blood and flame. But the cost is staggering. Every mile closer to Japan is paid for in bodies and smoke. Over Iwo Jima, the morning sky glows red. Volcano Island, black rock and sulfur ash, is ringed by battleships hammering its defenses. For weeks, Japanese soldiers have burrowed into tunnels deep beneath the mountain, turning it into a fortress. When the Marines land, the beach explodes under them. Machine guns chatter from hidden bunkers, mortars rain down from unseen hills, the air smells of cordite and death. They fight for every inch. The sand itself seems alive, swallowing men and steel. Flamethrowers roar into tunnels, grenades echo underground. Days blur together in fire and screams. On the fifth day atop Mount Suribachi, 6 Marines raise the flag, a moment caught in a single photograph that becomes the symbol of a generation's sacrifice. But even as the flag waves, the killing continues. 26,000 Americans fall before the island is finally declared secure. Out of 20,000 Japanese defenders, barely a few hundred survive. Barely a month later, the focus shifts to Okinawa, the gateway to Japan itself. April 1, 1945. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific begins. Waves of landing craft surge toward the shore, supported by aircraft and naval firepower. The beaches are strangely quiet, too quiet. Then, as the troops move inland, the storm breaks. Kamikaze planes dive from the clouds, crashing into ships in flames. The sea burns for miles, oil fires turning the waves black. On land, the Japanese fight with the desperation of the doomed. Caves, ridges, and hills become fortresses. The rain never stops, mud, smoke, and rot fill the air. The fighting lasts for 3 brutal months. Over 200,000 dead, soldiers and civilians alike. Okinawa is taken, but the victory feels hollow. Now only Japan remains. The generals study invasion plans, Operation Downfall, a land assault that could cost 1 million lives. But across the Pacific, in New Mexico, a new kind of weapon waits in silence. A secret born in laboratories, guarded by soldiers, and shaped by the minds of physicists who fear its own creation. On August 6, 1945, a silver B-29 named Enola Gay rises into the dawn. Inside its bomb bay rests a single weapon, little boy. The target, Hiroshima. The crew flies in silence. Below them, the city wakes to another ordinary morning. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb falls. For a second there is nothing, then light, a blinding flash brighter than the sun. The city vanishes beneath a cloud of fire and wind. Tens of thousands die instantly, their shadows burned into stone. 3 days later, Nagasaki follows. The emperor's voice breaks the silence that follows. Japan surrenders. The war that began in fury and conquest ends in ash and silence. The Pacific, once filled with fire, is still at last. Across the oceans, the world exhales, but what remains is not peace, only the beginning of something new. September 2, 1945. Tokyo Bay lies calm beneath a gray morning sky. The battleship USS Missouri floats at anchor, flags snapping in the wind. On her deck, Allied officers gather, Americans, British, Soviets, Chinese. Cameras click, pens are readied. At 9:04 a.m., representatives of the Japanese government step forward, faces pale, hands trembling. Before the watching world, they sign the instrument of surrender. The Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history, is over. Silence follows, then a low rumble as ships across the bay sound their horns. The echo carries for miles over a world forever changed. But victory brings not celebration, it brings reckoning. Across Europe and Asia, cities are nothing but ruins. Berlin is a skeleton of stone, Warsaw, Hiroshima, Dresden, names that now mean only loss. Millions wander the roads, displaced and hollow-eyed. The dead cannot be counted, the living cannot yet comprehend what has been done. In Germany, the victors divide the land into zones. Soviet troops occupy the east, the Western allies the west. The map of Europe is redrawn, borders shifted by the will of those who survived. In the ashes of fascism, a new struggle begins, one not fought with tanks but with fear, spies, and ideology. The Cold War is born. In Nuremberg, justice is prepared. The surviving architects of the Reich stand before a tribunal, men once untouchable, now stripped of their power. Evidence fills the courtroom, photographs, documents, the voices of witnesses who survived the camps. When the verdicts are read, some are hanged, others imprisoned, yet no sentence can balance what was lost. Across the Pacific, the occupation of Japan begins. General Douglas MacArthur walks ashore, calm and towering amid a shattered nation. But unlike Germany, Japan's rebuilding follows a different path. The emperor remains, redefined not as a god but as a man. The constitution is rewritten. Factories rise from rubble, schools reopen, and a nation once consumed by war begins to rise in peace. In the ruins of Europe, the Marshall Plan takes shape, billions in aid to rebuild what the bombs destroyed. Trains move again, lights return to the cities, children go back to school. Out of devastation, a fragile hope flickers. But the shadow of the bomb lingers. The image of the mushroom cloud haunts the minds of all who saw it. Scientists, soldiers, and civilians alike know the weapon that ended one war could destroy the world in the next. A new age begins, one balanced on fear and deterrence, where peace exists not by trust but by the threat of annihilation. Still, amid the ruins, life returns. Soldiers go home, families reunite, flags are lowered, graves are marked, and nations try to remember how to live again. The war has ended, but its echo will never fade. It is in the faces of survivors, the silence of empty towns, the pages of every history book yet to be written. From the beaches of Normandy to the ashes of Hiroshima, from the frozen fields of Stalingrad to the burning jungles of the Pacific, one truth remains: humanity's capacity for destruction is matched only by its will to endure. The world will rebuild, scarred but standing. And though the fires of war are gone, the lessons carved into history will forever whisper through time, a warning and a reminder of what it cost to be free. The forests of Eastern Europe echo with silence broken only by the boots of SS troops and the faint crackle of gunfire. Railcars filled with men, women, and children arrive at camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. They are weak, terrified, clutching bundles of belongings that will be taken from them before the gates close. The world around them is gray, cold, and unfeeling. Inside the camps, prisoners are sorted immediately. Those deemed unfit for labor are sent directly to gas chambers. Zyklon B fills the air, invisible and lethal, leaving only smoke and ashes behind. Others are forced into back-breaking labor, digging trenches, building rail lines, or working in factories for the war effort. Hunger and disease stalk them as relentlessly as the guards. Commanders like Rudolf Höss enforce the rules with precision. Every detail of murder is catalogued. Trains scheduled, quotas calculated, numbers tattooed onto skin. The machinery of genocide runs like clockwork, cold and efficient. Families are torn apart, communities erased, and entire cultures targeted for extinction. In ghettos across Poland, Jews fight to survive. Children hide in basements, elders keep records of births and deaths, scholars smuggle books and memories in secret. Resistance groups form, smuggling food and weapons, plotting uprisings in towns and cities like Warsaw. Yet they are constantly hunted, the ghettos liquidated with fire and brutality. By 1942, the final solution is in full operation. Death camps operate at terrifying efficiency. Trains from across Europe deliver their human cargo. In a single day, thousands can be murdered, their bodies cremated, their existence reduced to statistics on a ledger. Yet amid horror, acts of courage persist. Prisoners share rations, hide one another, pass information to outsiders. Outside the camps, the world slowly begins to understand the scale of the atrocities. Reports reach Allied leaders, but disbelief in the chaos of war delay immediate action. By 1944, the Red Army begins to liberate territories in the East, uncovering mass graves and survivors barely clinging to life. Soldiers are confronted with the unimaginable mountains of bodies, piles of clothing, the smell of decay hanging over entire villages. Liberation is both salvation and shock. Survivors emerge, skeletal and haunted, into a world that cannot yet comprehend their suffering. Relief organizations provide food, shelter, and medical care, but the psychological scars are indelible. Families have vanished, homes are gone, entire communities wiped from the map. The Holocaust leaves behind not only death but a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty. The evidence, photographs, diaries, mass graves becomes central to post-war justice at the Nuremberg trials. Perpetrators are held accountable, but the loss is immeasurable. From ghettos to forests, from camps to liberated towns, the Holocaust demonstrates a darkness that spreads alongside the war, a calculated and systematic attempt to erase entire populations. It is a chapter of suffering that shadows every battlefield, every strategy, every victory, and reminds the world that total war encompasses more than armies. It encompasses the soul of humanity itself. 1939–1945. Across factories and laboratories in Germany, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, the war transforms industry into a relentless engine of death and invention. Smokestacks roar, assembly lines stretch for miles, and workers labor around the clock to produce weapons that will decide the fate of nations. In Germany, engineers perfect the Panzer tanks. The Tiger and Panther roar across fields with armor impervious to most Allied shells. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dominate the skies, their speed and maneuverability unmatched until countered by Allied fighters. Rockets and jet engines are in experimental stages. The V-1 and V-2 missiles loom as warnings of destruction from above. In Britain, the Spitfire and Hurricane are developed with painstaking care. Factories in Coventry and Birmingham churn out aircraft in numbers that cannot be ignored. Radar technology, secret and revolutionary, alerts the RAF to incoming raids, turning the tide in the Battle of Britain. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park decode Enigma signals, giving the Allies critical intelligence that saves thousands of lives and destroys entire German convoys. In the United States, the industrial miracle accelerates. Detroit, Chicago, and Pittsburgh produce Sherman tanks, B-17 bombers, Liberty ships, and rifles at a pace unimaginable just years before. The Manhattan Project, secret and immense, develops the atomic bomb, a weapon capable of ending the war in a single instant. Factories hum day and night, women joining the workforce en masse as men fight overseas. Rosie the Riveter becomes the symbol of a nation mobilized. Soviet industry, too, rises from the ashes. Factories are dismantled in the West and transported east of the Urals. Tanks like the T-34 roll off the lines in staggering numbers, outmatching German armor in both quantity and reliability. Aircraft, artillery, and small arms are produced relentlessly, sustaining a population and army that refuses to yield to starvation or fire. On the battlefield, these innovations shape strategy. Tanks enable blitzkrieg and armored thrusts, aircraft dictate control of skies and seas, and long-range artillery reshape sieges. Logistics become warfare itself. Rail lines, convoys, and supply chains are as crucial as rifles and cannons. Engineers lay bridges under fire, repair bombed roads, and maintain vehicles that would otherwise halt an army in its tracks. Technology is also terrifyingly efficient. Bombs grow in size and destructive power. The British Lancaster drops tons on German cities, leveling entire districts. Germany's V-2 rockets strike London without warning. Submarines stalk the Atlantic, sinking convoys in the night. Code, encryption, radar, and sonar define victories and failures far beyond the battlefield. By the end of the war, nearly every major invention in warfare, from tanks and aircraft to radar and nuclear weapons, has been tested under fire. The combination of science, industry, and human labor turns nations into machines of survival and annihilation. Innovation is both salvation and curse. It shortens battles but magnifies destruction, leaving cities in ruins and populations traumatized. The war demonstrates the immense power of technology when harnessed by nations at total mobilization. Victory is not just about strategy, courage, or numbers. It is about speed, efficiency, and the relentless application of knowledge to the machinery of war. Across occupied Europe, silent wars rage in the shadows. Forests, cities, and villages become the hidden theaters of defiance. In France, the Maquis move under cover of night, sabotaging rail lines, cutting telephone wires, and ambushing German patrols. The resistance is small but determined, farmers, students, and former soldiers risking everything for a chance to strike back. In Poland, the underground Home Army operates in secrecy. Couriers slip through checkpoints with coded messages, weapons caches are hidden beneath floorboards. Partisans strike German convoys, destroy bridges, and ignite explosions in warehouses storing supplies for the Reich. Every attack is calculated, a ripple designed to disrupt, slow, and weaken the occupiers. In Norway and Denmark, resistance fighters sabotage railroads and factories, slowing production of ships and weapons destined for the Atlantic. In the forests of Belarus, Soviet partisans emerge behind German lines, ambushing convoys and striking isolated garrisons. They live among peasants, relying on the land and local populations to survive. Hunger is constant, frost bites through ragged uniforms. Capture means death, but surrender is never an option. In Italy, as Mussolini's regime collapses, partisans liberate towns before the Allies arrive. Streets are filled with both jubilation and violence. Collaborators are hunted, supplies are seized, and villages become centers of guerrilla operations. Young men and women, once farmers or students, carry out missions with rifles and courage born of desperation. In France, D-Day is preceded and aided by the resistance. They cut communications, ambush patrols, and relay intelligence to Allied command. Sabotage delays German reinforcements, buying precious hours for landing forces. Without these unseen warriors, the beaches of Normandy would have been even bloodier. Resistance is not uniform. It varies by region, ideology, and resources. Communist partisans clash with monarchists and nationalists, Jews fight in ghettos and forests, ordinary citizens smuggle food and medicine. Each act, however small, contributes to the erosion of the Axis hold. Punishment is brutal. Captured partisans are executed, often publicly. Entire villages are burned in reprisal, yet even under fear and fire the network grows. Secret newspapers circulate, false documents are forged, and hidden radios transmit news from London and Moscow. The spirit of rebellion spreads silently, a shadow war alongside the front lines. By 1944, these efforts converge with Allied operations. Sabotage, intelligence, and uprisings aid the liberation of France, Italy, and the Low Countries. The partisans become indispensable, ordinary people transforming into soldiers, spies, and saboteurs, fighting not just to survive but to reclaim their nations. Resistance movements demonstrate that total war extends beyond armies and frontlines. It reaches into homes, fields, and hidden forests, proving that even under tyranny, courage and defiance can persist. 1939–1945. Across continents, war is not confined to the battlefield. Cities hum with factories, towns are conscripted into supply networks, and families endure privation and fear. Civilians become part of the war machine, whether they wield a rifle, a wrench, or a needle. In Britain, air raid sirens wail nightly. Families descend into the underground, clutching children and pets. London burns during the Blitz, Coventry is leveled, and Sheffield's factories are reduced to rubble. Women take up jobs in munitions plants, shipyards, and farms, balancing fear with the rhythm of production. Rationing dictates every meal. Bread, meat, sugar, nothing is abundant, yet resilience persists. In Germany, propaganda fuels loyalty while shortages deepen. Children collect scrap metal, women sew uniforms, and factory workers labor 12-hour shifts under strict oversight. Cities like Hamburg and Dresden face Allied bombing campaigns that flatten entire neighborhoods. Civilians endure hunger, fear, and the constant threat of death from the sky. In the Soviet Union, cities like Leningrad experience the longest sieges in history. Starvation becomes a weapon of survival. Civilians burn furniture and even wallpaper paste to stave off hunger. Yet they maintain factories within the city walls, producing guns, shells, and tanks for the army outside. The front is never far, the line between soldier and civilian blurs completely. In the United States, industry hums to life with unprecedented speed. Factories produce tanks, airplanes, rifles, and ships on a scale that dwarfs the Axis powers. Women enter the workforce in record numbers, inspiring the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter. Civilians buy war bonds, grow victory gardens, and endure blackouts along the coasts to protect against potential air raids. In Japan, civilians are mobilized for total war. Students dig trenches, factory workers assemble weapons, and families prepare for air raids. As the American fleet approaches, cities brace for destruction. By 1945, firebombing reduces Tokyo, Osaka, and other urban centers to ashes, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Everywhere, children grow up amid chaos. Schools are temporary, shelters become classrooms, and toys are replaced by rationed food. Fear is constant, but so too is ingenuity. Smuggling, secret lessons, underground newspapers, and acts of quiet defiance become survival strategies. The war redefines gender roles, labor systems, and the relationship between government and citizens. Total war means that every action, every rationed meal, every factory shift contributes to victory or survival. Civilians are no longer observers, they are participants, and their endurance becomes as crucial as that of soldiers on distant battlefields. By 1945, when guns fall silent, the home fronts reveal both the cost and the resilience of populations under siege. Cities are in ruins, families lost, and economies strained, yet the same civilians who survived hardship now help rebuild nations from the ground up. 1945 and beyond. The world emerges from 6 years of unprecedented destruction. Cities lie in rubble, populations are displaced, economies shattered, and millions mourn the dead. Yet from the ashes, new political orders and global institutions rise, shaping the future in the shadow of war. In Europe, the United Nations begins to take form, conceived as a body to prevent the repetition of such total conflict. Borders are redrawn, Germany divided into occupation zones, and nations begin the slow process of reconstruction. Democracies are reaffirmed, but tensions between East and West quickly emerge, planting the seeds of the Cold War. The Nuremberg trials expose the scale of Nazi atrocities. Leaders once untouchable face justice for crimes against humanity. Testimonies reveal systematic genocide, mass executions, and the horrors of concentration camps. The world witnesses the consequences of ideology unchecked by morality, a reminder that victory over armies does not erase the human cost of hatred. In Asia, Japan undergoes occupation and reform. Emperor Hirohito remains as a symbolic figurehead while democratic institutions are established under Allied supervision. Cities rebuild. From the ashes of firebombing and atomic strikes, the Pacific Islands, once battlefields of death, begin a slow return to normalcy. Technologically, the war accelerates innovation. Nuclear weapons, jet engines, radar, and advanced medical techniques enter civilian life, forever changing science and industry. The lessons of logistics, production, and mass mobilization influence economies and militaries for decades. Culturally, the war leaves deep scars. Literature, art, and film document the suffering and heroism witnessed on every front. Survivors recount experiences in memoirs, photographs, and testimony, ensuring that the events are remembered, studied, and never repeated. The Holocaust, in particular, becomes a permanent marker of human cruelty and the need for vigilance. Politically, alliances shift. NATO, the Warsaw Pact, and other blocs are created to maintain balance, while decolonization movements gain momentum in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The war's end does not mean peace for all, instead, it signals a new era of struggle, reconstruction, and vigilance. Socially, populations are forever altered. Women who entered workforces during the war continue to challenge traditional roles. Soldiers return to rebuild lives, carrying the trauma of combat. Entire generations grow up with the knowledge that total war touches every aspect of existence, family, home, and society. World War II leaves a legacy of both caution and progress. Its battles, both fought and survived, demonstrate the extremes of human capability for destruction, endurance, and resilience. The maps, monuments, and memories serve as warnings and lessons for generations to come. History remembers not only the strategy, the victories, and the defeats, but also the cost borne by millions: soldiers, civilians, prisoners, and the innocent. The shadows of war remain long, teaching that the freedom and peace enjoyed today were forged in fire, blood, and unwavering will. 1945 and the years following. Across continents, nations struggle to honor the dead while reconciling the trauma left behind. Graves stretch across battlefields, cemeteries rise in forests and fields, and monuments are erected in city squares and along highways to preserve memory. In Normandy, rows of white crosses mark the resting places of thousands of Allied soldiers who gave their lives on D-Day. Visitors walk quietly among the graves, tracing names and regiments. Nearby, the beaches remain scarred. Craters, remnants of bunkers, and rusted tank treads serve as reminders of the slaughter that occurred on those sands. In Eastern Europe, memorials rise at Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Treblinka. Photographs, shoes, and personal items fill museums, each artifact a testament to those murdered in the Holocaust. Survivors, many scarred physically and emotionally, return to these sites to tell their stories, ensuring that the world does not forget the depths of human cruelty. In the Pacific, Hiroshima and Nagasaki honor the victims of atomic strikes. Peace parks, memorials, and museums tell the story of nuclear devastation, warning future generations of the consequences of total war. Monuments to the fallen islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, commemorating soldiers who died in brutal battles far from home. Every nation that suffered erects its own memorials. Plaques, statues, and museums are built, each reflecting the unique experiences of civilians and soldiers. Schools teach history with photographs, letters, and first-hand accounts. Annual ceremonies on VE Day and VJ Day keep memory alive, passing stories from one generation to the next. Beyond physical monuments, memory exists in personal narratives. Diaries, letters, and oral histories capture moments of fear, courage, and survival. Veterans recount battles, civilians describe sieges, and families preserve the legacies of those lost. These stories, both intimate and immense, ensure that the scale of sacrifice is never abstract. Memorialization also shapes culture. Films, literature, and art revisit the war, exploring heroism, horror, and the human cost. Music and poetry reflect grief and resilience, embedding the war's lessons into collective consciousness. Memory becomes both warning and tribute, an acknowledgement that the freedoms and peace of the present were paid for in unimaginable blood and sacrifice. Through cemeteries, monuments, museums, and stories, the world confronts the enormity of loss. Remembering the fallen becomes not just an act of honor but a responsibility to preserve truth, to educate, and to ensure that such a conflict never recurs. The shadows of the Second World War remain, but they illuminate the courage, endurance, and humanity that survived even in the darkest hours. 1945 and the immediate post-war years. The world, exhausted by conflict, enters an era of unprecedented transformation. Governments, economies, and societies must rebuild from rubble while navigating the new balance of power forged by the war. In Europe, the Marshall Plan injects billions of dollars into reconstruction. Factories rise from the ashes of bombed cities, railways are repaired, and ports reopen to commerce. Governments struggle to stabilize currencies, provide housing, and resettle millions of refugees displaced by years of occupation and shifting borders. Germany and Italy, former Axis powers, undergo political restructuring, adopting democratic institutions under Allied supervision. In Asia, Japan's surrender leads to sweeping reforms under the Allied occupation. Land reforms redistribute farmland to peasants, educational systems are modernized, and a constitution guarantees civil liberties while limiting military power. Cities devastated by firebombing and atomic strikes slowly rebuild, and industry shifts from military production to civilian needs. Globally, the United Nations is founded to prevent future conflict, with a Security Council designed to balance power between major nations. Nations begin to cooperate on economic, health, and humanitarian issues, establishing a framework for international diplomacy in an age of nuclear weapons. The war accelerates decolonization. In India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and across Africa, colonial populations demand independence. European powers, weakened by 6 years of total war, cannot maintain overseas empires. The post-war decades become a contest between emerging nations, former colonial powers, and the ideological divide between East and West. Socially, the war reshapes gender roles, labor systems, and population dynamics. Millions of women remain in the workforce, having proven essential in wartime production. Urbanization accelerates as survivors migrate to cities for employment and housing. Education systems expand to accommodate baby boom generations. Economically, technology developed for war is repurposed for peace. Jet engines, radar, and computing systems enter civilian life. Medical advances, including antibiotics and surgical techniques, save countless lives. Global trade resumes, but nations remain vigilant against instability and scarcity, lessons learned from wartime rationing and disruption. Politically, the world divides into spheres of influence. The United States and the Soviet Union emerge as superpowers, their ideological conflict defining the Cold War. NATO and the Warsaw Pact solidify military alliances, while espionage, propaganda, and proxy conflicts replace the total war of the 1940s. Culturally, societies grapple with trauma and memory. Literature, film, and art process the devastation and heroism of the war. Holocaust memorials, war cemeteries, and survivor testimonies become central to historical consciousness. Education emphasizes the lessons of total war, the human cost of ideology, the consequences of aggression, and the importance of vigilance. The Second World War does not end with surrender alone. It transforms the very structure of the modern world. Borders, governments, economies, and societies are remade. The legacy of destruction, resilience, and innovation shapes politics, culture, and daily life for generations, ensuring that the echoes of total war continue to influence every corner of the globe. 1939–1945 and the decades that follow. The war reshapes not only nations but the very way humans understand and express themselves. Art, literature, science, and technology are transformed under the pressures of total conflict and the urgency of survival. In science, wartime research accelerates discovery at an unprecedented pace. Nuclear physics moves from theory to practice with the Manhattan Project, producing atomic bombs that redefine military strategy and energy. Rocketry advances through German W2 programs, laying the foundation for space exploration. Medicine is revolutionized. Antibiotics like penicillin are mass-produced, surgical techniques improve, and understanding of trauma and rehabilitation grows, saving lives in both war and peace. In literature, voices emerge from battlefields, concentration camps, and occupied cities. Diaries, memoirs, and novels convey the human cost of conflict, the fear, courage, and resilience of civilians and soldiers. Writers like Anne Frank, Primo Levi, and Erich Maria Remarque give readers intimate windows into experiences that statistics alone cannot capture. Poetry and essays grapple with moral questions, the nature of evil, and the endurance of hope. In visual arts, realism and abstraction both respond to war. Photographers capture the immediacy of destruction, bombed cities, liberated camps, and battlefields frozen in time. Painters depict both literal devastation and the psychological scars of combat, exploring themes of trauma, loss, and humanity's capacity for renewal. Film becomes a medium for documentation and reflection, from propaganda reels to post-war narratives exploring the moral complexities of total war. Technology born of conflict enters civilian life. Radar systems evolve into air traffic control, computing machines developed for code breaking lay the groundwork for modern computers, aviation innovations translate into commercial flight. The boundaries between military research and civilian application shrink, forever altering global infrastructure and knowledge. Cultural memory also becomes a tool for education and prevention. Museums, archives, and memorials ensure that the experiences of soldiers and civilians remain visible. International exhibitions display artifacts, photographs, and interactive reconstructions, teaching future generations the consequences of total war and genocide. Music and performance reflect the era's trauma and resilience. Songs of soldiers, wartime broadcasts, and post-war compositions blend memory with emotion. Jazz, swing, and later popular music provide both escape and unity, while operas and plays explore loss, heroism, and survival. Ultimately, the Second World War transforms human expression and understanding. Knowledge accelerates, culture adapts, and the arts become a mirror of humanity's extremes. The lessons embedded in these scientific and cultural achievements ensure that memory persists, not only as history, but as a foundation for moral, technological, and creative growth. Europe lies in ruins and the war-weary nations face a new reality. The alliance that defeated the Axis powers fractures almost immediately. The United States and the Soviet Union, once united against a common enemy, now confront each other across a continent divided by ideology and suspicion. In Germany, the eastern zones fall under Soviet control, while the west is administered by the United States, Britain, and later France. Berlin itself is partitioned, a city divided in both streets and spirit. The Red Army consolidates power, installing communist governments in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania. In response, Western nations establish democratic institutions and economic programs to stabilize their spheres of influence. Across the globe, former colonies push for independence. India accelerates its path to freedom, while movements in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East draw inspiration from the weakening of European powers. The United Nations is formed to mediate conflicts, but the competing agendas of superpowers often stifle its effectiveness. Military presence intensifies. Both the United States and the Soviet Union maintain armies in Europe and Asia, armed with weapons far more destructive than those used in the recent war. Nuclear stockpiles grow as deterrence becomes central to strategy. Spy networks expand, and intelligence agencies operate across borders, setting the stage for decades of covert operations and proxy conflicts. Economically, the world divides into competing blocs. The Marshall Plan rebuilds Western Europe with American aid, fostering industrial recovery and consumer growth. In the East, Soviet-controlled economies adopt central planning, extracting reparations from occupied territories and establishing state-controlled industries. Trade patterns are redefined, and global economic competition becomes entwined with ideology. Socially, populations adjust to the reality of occupation, surveillance, and propaganda. Families are reunited after years of displacement, but fear and mistrust persist. In Berlin, children grow up knowing two worlds separated by walls. In Eastern Europe, dissent is suppressed under tightly controlled regimes. Education, media, and culture are shaped to reinforce political objectives. The war's legacy permeates diplomacy. Treaties, alliances, and summits are dominated by the memory of recent devastation and the desire to prevent another global conflict. Yet the specter of nuclear annihilation hangs over every negotiation. Proxy wars erupt in Korea, Greece, and elsewhere, demonstrating that the ideological struggle can erupt anywhere with devastating consequences. From the ashes of World War II, a new kind of conflict emerges, one fought not only with armies but with ideology, technology, and influence. The world remains divided, fragile, and vigilant, forever shaped by the total war that came before. 1945 and the decades that follow. The Second World War leaves an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of humanity. Lessons etched in blood, fire, and courage influence politics, society, and the moral framework of future generations. Nations recognize that total war spares no one. Civilians, soldiers, and entire cultures are vulnerable when ideology overrides humanity. International law evolves, emphasizing the protection of noncombatants, the prohibition of genocide, and the accountability of leaders. The Geneva Conventions are expanded, and institutions like the International Criminal Court emerge as guardians against crimes that once went unpunished. Education becomes a vehicle for remembrance. Schools incorporate history lessons not only of battles and strategies, but of human suffering, moral choice, and resilience. Holocaust memorials, museums, and survivor testimonies teach the importance of vigilance against hatred, intolerance, and authoritarianism. Literature, film, and art continue to preserve the memory of wartime experiences, shaping public consciousness. Technological and scientific advancements born from conflict are harnessed for peace. Nuclear power, aviation, computing, and medicine transform daily life, but they carry warnings. Innovation without oversight can lead to devastation. Societies debate ethics alongside progress, aware that knowledge alone cannot prevent catastrophe. Communities rebuild with resilience. Cities rise from ruins, economies stabilize, and displaced populations reconstruct families and lives. Cultural and social shifts, gender roles, migration patterns, and civic participation demonstrate humanity's ability to adapt, survive, and grow even after unimaginable loss. Politically, the lessons of war influence diplomacy, alliances, and international cooperation. The United Nations, NATO, and regional organizations reflect a commitment to preventing the global collapse that occurred in 1939. Nations understand that peace is fragile, requiring constant effort, compromise, and foresight. Yet memory is never passive. Monuments, cemeteries, and preserved battlefields remind future generations that freedom and security are earned through sacrifice. Anniversaries, ceremonies, and oral histories reinforce that the past is a guide, not a distant story. The Second World War teaches that humanity's greatest strength lies in endurance, courage, and moral choice. It warns that technological power and political ambition without ethical restraint can destroy civilizations. It proves that even in darkness, resistance, solidarity, and compassion can survive. From the beaches of Normandy to the forests of Eastern Europe, from Pacific islands to liberated cities, the echoes of World War II endure. Humanity's vigilance, memory, and commitment to justice become the lasting monuments, ensuring that the lessons of total war are neither forgotten nor repeated. 1945 onward. The world confronts the aftermath not only of destruction but of trauma, physical, emotional, and moral. Nations, communities, and individuals must reconcile with the horrors they witnessed, endured, or perpetrated, seeking ways to rebuild trust and humanity. In Germany and Japan, societies face the dual task of rebuilding infrastructure and confronting guilt. Citizens navigate the tension between survival during wartime and complicity in atrocities. Education campaigns, public trials, and memorials foster reflection, while political reforms reshape governance to prevent future authoritarianism. Across Europe, displaced populations return home. Survivors of concentration camps search for lost family members amid ruined towns. Refugees from Eastern Europe attempt to reclaim property, while entire communities grapple with the consequences of collaboration, betrayal, and war crimes. Local and international tribunals provide justice, but reconciliation is slower, a complex negotiation between memory, forgiveness, and accountability. In Asia, nations recover from bombings, occupation, and civil conflicts. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cities vaporized in an instant, become centers of peace advocacy. Survivors Hibakusha recount stories of nuclear devastation, shaping international movements against atomic warfare and promoting humanitarian principles. China, Korea, and Southeast Asia rebuild under new political realities, navigating power vacuums and emerging independence movements. Globally, reconciliation extends beyond borders. Former enemies participate in treaties, trade, and cultural exchange, acknowledging shared losses and responsibilities. The Marshall Plan fosters not only economic recovery in Western Europe but also diplomatic ties that encourage cooperation over conflict. International organizations mediate disputes, attempt to prevent future wars, and promote human rights, laying the groundwork for a more interconnected world. Communities memorialize their dead while teaching younger generations. Museums, memorials, and archives preserve letters, diaries, and photographs. Oral histories pass on first-hand experiences, ensuring the horrors and heroism of total war remain alive in collective memory. Healing also requires confronting moral questions. How could entire societies participate in atrocity? How does one balance justice with forgiveness? Philosophers, historians, and educators explore these questions, seeking to understand human nature and to guide future choices. Despite scars, the world demonstrates resilience. Cities are rebuilt, economies revived, families reunited. Alliances form, cultural exchanges flourish, and education emphasizes the lessons of history. Reflection becomes both a duty and a path to prevention, a commitment to ensuring that the devastation of World War II serves as a guide for peace, justice, and humanity. 1945 and the decades that follow. The Second World War becomes more than a historical event. It transforms into a shared legacy that shapes collective consciousness, national identities, and global values. Monuments, museums, and education programs embed the memory of sacrifice and suffering into generations far removed from the battlefields. In Europe, memorials mark not only cemeteries and battle sites but also towns destroyed by bombings. Cities like Dresden, Warsaw, and Rotterdam preserve fragments of ruins alongside new construction, blending memory with renewal. Schools incorporate lessons on total war, genocide, and resistance, teaching students that freedom and democracy require vigilance and courage. In the United States, the war influences culture, politics, and industry. Memorials and national cemeteries honor soldiers' sacrifices, while literature, film, and photography recount campaigns and home front experiences. Veterans organizations preserve first-hand accounts, ensuring that the human dimensions of conflict endure alongside strategic histories. In Asia, Hiroshima and Nagasaki become symbols of the destructive potential of modern warfare and the urgent need for peace. Survivors' testimonies are recorded, peace parks established, and international campaigns for nuclear disarmament gain momentum. Cities rebuild, blending remembrance with renewal, while education emphasizes responsibility, ethics, and the consequences of technological power. The Holocaust's memory becomes central to global understanding of human rights violations. Memorials, museums, and survivor testimonies ensure that genocide is studied not as abstract history but as a moral imperative. Laws evolve to punish crimes against humanity, embedding accountability into international norms. Memory is not static, it evolves with time. Cultural expression continues to reinterpret the war through film, literature, art, and performance, allowing new generations to understand the stakes, courage, and failures of the past. Reenactments, archival exhibitions, and interactive museums bridge historical distance, making the experiences of total war tangible and personal. Globally, the war's legacy informs diplomacy, law, and ethics. Alliances, treaties, and international organizations are shaped by lessons learned, emphasizing cooperation, human rights, and the prevention of large-scale conflict. Scientific and technological advancements developed during the war continue to influence society, but are tempered by the awareness of their potential for destruction. Ultimately, the Second World War becomes a touchstone for humanity, a reminder of both the capacity for destruction and the power of resilience. Memory ensures that the stories of soldiers, civilians, and survivors endure, guiding decisions and inspiring generations to uphold justice, compassion, and vigilance. 1945 onward. Across continents, nations established days, monuments, and ceremonies to honor those who lived, fought, and died in the Second World War. These acts of remembrance forge a shared global history, transcending borders while acknowledging the unique experiences of each country. In Europe, May 8th is observed as Victory in Europe Day. Parades, wreath-laying ceremonies, and moments of silence mark the sacrifices of soldiers and civilians alike. In cities like London, Paris, and Berlin, memorials provide spaces for reflection, blending solemnity with the presence of living communities rebuilding in the shadow of past destruction. Across the Pacific, August 15th and September 2nd are remembered as the days marking Japan's surrender. Peace ceremonies in Hiroshima and Nagasaki focus on the victims of atomic warfare, emphasizing global responsibility, nuclear disarmament, and the value of human life. Survivors, Hibakusha, recount their experiences, shaping collective consciousness and influencing international policy. In Israel, memorials and Yom HaShoah commemorate Holocaust victims. Survivors share stories in schools, museums, and communities, ensuring that the genocide is remembered not as abstraction, but as a human tragedy that demands moral vigilance. Other countries establish similar sites, honoring civilians lost to bombing campaigns, forced labor, and occupation. Veterans organizations worldwide maintain cemeteries, monuments, and museums. Personal artifacts, uniforms, letters, and photographs preserve individual narratives, bridging the gap between historical record and lived experience. National holidays, parades, and ceremonies reinforce the enduring gratitude for sacrifice, forging continuity between past and present. Educational programs worldwide incorporate history into curricula, often focusing on the ethical and human dimensions of conflict. Students examine first-hand accounts, photographs, and film, engaging with the realities of warfare beyond strategy and politics. Museums use interactive exhibits and survivor testimonies to immerse younger generations in the experiences of those who endured total war. Cultural expression continues to commemorate the conflict. Literature, film, and performance explore heroism, trauma, resistance, and survival. Music, theater, and visual arts memorialize both the tragedies and acts of courage that emerged, ensuring that memory remains dynamic and relevant. Global remembrance also fosters reconciliation. Former adversaries engage in joint ceremonies, cultural exchanges, and historical collaborations, acknowledging shared suffering while promoting understanding and cooperation. These acts reinforce the principle that memory is a tool not only for honoring the dead, but for guiding the living toward peace and empathy. Through monuments, ceremonies, education, and cultural expression, the Second World War remains alive in human consciousness. The shared history, preserved across generations, transforms loss into lesson, ensuring that the sacrifices and resilience of those who endured total war continue to shape a vigilant, compassionate, and interconnected world. 1939–1945 and beyond. Amid the devastation of total war, the capacity of humans to endure, resist, and act with courage becomes evident across every front and home. Soldiers and civilians alike confront impossible circumstances, yet moments of bravery, compassion, and ingenuity shine through the darkness. On the battlefields of Europe, ordinary soldiers display extraordinary valor. Infantrymen advance under heavy fire, medics tend to the wounded in shell-cratered fields, and tank crews endure hours of relentless combat. Courage is measured not only in victories but in survival, in acts of selflessness that save lives while risking one's own. In occupied territories, civilians demonstrate quiet heroism. Families hide fugitives, deliver messages for the resistance, or smuggle food to starving communities. Children grow up too fast, learning to navigate air raids, rationing, and the constant presence of fear. Their endurance preserves life and hope even when survival seems impossible. Partisans and resistance fighters operate with ingenuity and resolve. Sabotage, espionage, and covert operations test both physical and mental limits. Success often comes at a steep cost, yet their persistence weakens enemy control and enables broader strategic victories. These acts, though small individually, collectively shape the outcome of campaigns and inspire future generations. In concentration camps, survivors endure extreme deprivation. Starvation, forced labor, and brutality are daily realities, yet many maintain hope, solidarity, and the will to live. Acts of kindness, sharing meager rations, comforting the sick, or secretly preserving knowledge become forms of defiance and humanity against overwhelming cruelty. On the home fronts, civilians maintain production and morale under extraordinary pressure. Women operate factories, maintain farms, and organize communities, ensuring armies are supplied and families survive. Ordinary tasks become acts of endurance and resilience, demonstrating that every contribution matters in a society mobilized for total war. Even in moments of profound loss, humans adapt. Refugees rebuild lives in new lands, cities are reconstructed from rubble, and families find ways to preserve memory and honor the fallen. The human spirit proves capable of creativity, courage, and hope even when surrounded by devastation. The Second World War highlights the duality of humanity: capacity for destruction and capacity for resilience. Courage, endurance, and resilience are not confined to generals and armies but are found in ordinary people responding to extraordinary circumstances. These qualities endure beyond the war, shaping societies, inspiring generations, and serving as a reminder that even in total darkness, humanity can prevail. 1939–1945. From the invasion of Poland to the signing of surrender documents in Tokyo Bay, the Second World War encompasses every corner of the globe, every layer of society, and every facet of human experience. It is a story of strategy and innovation, of destruction and creation, of cruelty and courage. The conflict reshapes nations, borders, and governments. Germany and Japan are transformed through defeat and occupation. Europe rebuilds from rubble while grappling with moral and political consequences. Asia emerges from occupation and atomic devastation into new geopolitical realities. The United States and the Soviet Union rise as superpowers, setting the stage for decades of global tension and ideological struggle. Total war alters human society permanently. Civilians experience the front lines through sieges, bombings, and displacement. Women, previously excluded from many industries, become essential contributors to the workforce. Science and technology advance at unprecedented speed, leaving a legacy of both innovation and cautionary lessons about the destructive power of knowledge. The moral and ethical. Diplomacy, influencing decisions from international law to nuclear deterrence. The war becomes a touchstone for the responsibilities of power, the fragility of peace, and the resilience of the human spirit. Ultimately, the Second World War is measured not only in battles won or lost, cities destroyed, or nations reshaped, but in the endurance, courage, and morality displayed by millions. It is a record of the extremes of human experience, the capacity for both unimaginable destruction and remarkable resilience. The legacy endures in memory, law, culture, and society. Every memorial, every story, every lesson passed to new generations ensures that the war remains a living history, a warning, and a guide. Humanity's vigilance, compassion, and commitment to justice are the enduring fruits of the conflict, shaping a world forever marked by its totality and striving for a future that honors both the fallen and the survivors. 1945 onward. The global map is in flux. Former empires struggle to maintain control over colonies weakened by years of war, while newly independent nations emerge, reshaping political, economic, and social landscapes across continents. In Asia, British India moves toward independence, culminating in the creation of India and Pakistan in 1947. Southeast Asia witnesses anti-colonial movements in Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, inspired by both wartime occupation and the weakening of European powers. Japan, under Allied supervision, rebuilds as a democratic nation, its industrial capacity reoriented from war to economic growth. In Africa, European powers face increasing demands for sovereignty. French, British, and Belgian colonies confront nationalist movements fueled by wartime experience, global discourse on human rights, and the desire for self-determination. Countries begin to negotiate independence, often through both diplomacy and conflict, setting the stage for the post-war decolonization wave. Europe itself undergoes massive reconstruction. The Marshall Plan injects capital into Western Europe, rebuilding infrastructure, stabilizing economies, and fostering political alignment with the West. Cities destroyed by bombing campaigns rise again, blending modern architecture with remnants of history. Meanwhile, Eastern Europe falls under Soviet influence, establishing communist regimes and centrally planned economies, creating a stark ideological divide. International institutions emerge to manage this new global order. The United Nations seeks to prevent large-scale conflict, mediate disputes, and address humanitarian crises. Regional organizations, treaties, and economic alliances form, reflecting both cooperation and competition among former allies and adversaries. Populations shift and migrate in response to redrawn borders and displacement from wartime destruction. Refugees, expellees, and returning soldiers resettle across Europe and Asia, carrying memories of loss, trauma, and resilience. Nations face the challenge of integrating diverse populations while maintaining social stability. Economically, wartime innovation drives peacetime recovery. Industrial infrastructure, technological advances, and agricultural reforms enable growth. Reconstruction is guided not only by necessity but by lessons learned about mobilization, logistics, and production efficiency during total war. Politically, the seeds of future global tension are planted. The ideological confrontation between democracy and communism begins to crystallize, leading to alliances, spheres of influence, and the foundation of the Cold War. The post-war period becomes an era of cautious rebuilding under the shadow of potential conflict, with nations seeking security, prosperity, and moral legitimacy. 1947 onward. The battlefield expands beyond Europe and Asia into ideological and proxy confrontations. The United States and the Soviet Union, victorious superpowers of the Second World War, project influence across the globe, turning local conflicts into arenas for their competing visions of governance. In Europe, Germany remains divided. The Berlin blockade of 1948-1949 tests the resolve of the Western Allies, prompting the Berlin airlift, where thousands of tons of supplies are flown daily into the city to sustain its population. The division of East and West Germany crystallizes, a living symbol of the ideological struggle that dominates global politics. In Asia, Korea becomes a flashpoint. The 1950 invasion of South Korea by the North triggers a three-year war, drawing in UN forces led by the United States and Chinese intervention in support of the North. Millions die in battles fought across mountains, rivers, and cities, demonstrating that the devastation of global conflict persists even after the Second World War. Southeast Asia and the Middle East see similar patterns. Vietnam's fight for independence from French colonial control intersects with Cold War tensions, drawing in international powers. In the Middle East, political alignment, resource control, and ideological influence create localized conflicts with global repercussions. Arms races and technological competition intensify the stakes. Nuclear weapons once deployed in war now serve as deterrents, creating a tense equilibrium. Conventional and unconventional warfare coexist with espionage, propaganda, and covert operations, making conflict invisible yet pervasive. Intelligence agencies like the CIA and KGB operate in secret, influencing governments, politics, and outcomes without direct battlefield engagement. Economically, nations align with superpowers through aid, trade, and development programs, creating spheres of influence that extend beyond military confrontation. The Marshall Plan strengthens Western Europe, while Soviet-backed programs consolidate control in Eastern Europe. Alliances such as NATO and the Warsaw Pact institutionalize these divisions, ensuring that ideological confrontation is maintained for decades. Culturally and socially, the shadow of the Second World War informs policy, education, and public perception. Propaganda portrays opposing ideologies as existential threats, while citizens navigate new anxieties about nuclear warfare, espionage, and political repression. Societies are shaped by vigilance, loyalty, and fear, carrying forward lessons learned from total war. The post-war ideological struggle demonstrates that the end of direct global conflict does not erase the consequences of total war. Instead, the lessons of World War II, the capacity for destruction, the importance of alliances, and the stakes of ideological division, shape the strategies, policies, and moral choices of nations in the emerging Cold War era. 1945 onward. As the guns fall silent, the world confronts not only the devastation of cities and lives but the enormity of crimes committed during the war. Leaders, soldiers, and collaborators are brought to account, establishing precedents for international law and human rights. In Nuremberg, Germany, trials begin in November 1945. Former Nazi officials stand before judges from the Allied powers, charged with crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Detailed evidence, including documents, photographs, and testimonies of survivors, exposes the systematic nature of genocide, forced labor, and mass executions. Defendants attempt to justify their actions as following orders, but the tribunal establishes individual responsibility as a cornerstone of justice. Simultaneously, similar proceedings occur in Asia. The Tokyo trials prosecute Japanese leaders for atrocities committed in China, Korea, the Philippines, and throughout the Pacific. Testimonies detail forced labor, massacres, and the exploitation of civilians. These trials reinforce the principle that political and military authority does not grant immunity from accountability. Beyond high-profile tribunals, local courts and commissions address crimes across occupied Europe. Communities confront collaborators, war profiteers, and those who committed atrocities against neighbors. Justice is uneven but forms part of a broader effort to reconcile societies with moral and legal responsibility for wartime actions. The concept of crimes against humanity gains legal definition. International law evolves to encompass genocide, systematic persecution, and acts targeting civilians, creating mechanisms for prevention and prosecution in future conflicts. These developments directly influence the formation of the United Nations Human Rights Initiatives, the Genocide Convention, and the International Criminal Court decades later. War crimes trials also serve an educative function. Survivors, witnesses, and historians document atrocities in detail, preserving evidence for posterity. Photographs, films, diaries, and physical remains are archived, forming the foundation for historical understanding, remembrance, and prevention. The pursuit of justice is not limited to courts. Memorials, museums, and educational programs reinforce moral lessons, ensuring that legal precedents are supplemented by cultural and societal awareness. By confronting crimes committed during total war, the world begins to codify ethical standards that aim to prevent recurrence. These proceedings underscore a central truth: victory in war does not absolve moral responsibility. Leaders and societies are accountable for their actions, and remembrance of both victims and perpetrators becomes essential to guiding future generations. Justice, though imperfect and incomplete, becomes a tool to balance memory, morality, and the pursuit of peace. 1945 and the decades that follow. The Second World War becomes a central narrative in literature, film, photography, and media, shaping collective memory and influencing generations who never experienced the conflict firsthand. Stories of heroism, survival, and atrocity permeate culture, preserving history while interpreting human experience. In literature, novels and memoirs recount battles, occupation, and the home front. Authors such as Anne Frank, Elie Wiesel, and Joseph Heller offer perspectives on survival, morality, and the absurdity of war. Historical fiction and biographies explore both the grand strategies of generals and the intimate lives of civilians, creating a nuanced understanding of total war. Film and television dramatize the conflict, blending documentary footage with narrative storytelling. Productions recreate battles, resistance movements, and life under occupation. Documentaries such as wartime footage collections and interviews with veterans provide authenticity, while fictionalized accounts engage audiences emotionally, allowing them to experience fear, courage, and sacrifice vicariously. Photography becomes a powerful medium of memory. Iconic images from the beaches of Normandy, liberated concentration camps, and urban bombings capture the human cost of war. These photographs are displayed in museums, newspapers, and publications, creating visual records that endure beyond written history. Art, music, and theater interpret both trauma and resilience. Painters, composers, and playwrights examine loss, identity, and morality, transforming personal and collective experiences into cultural expression. Music from the war era and post-war compositions memorialize emotions, uniting communities through shared remembrance. Educational media extends the reach of memory. Interactive exhibits, virtual reconstructions, and archival digitization bring historical events to life for younger generations. Schools integrate multimedia resources to teach both strategy and human experience, ensuring that the lessons of total war remain accessible and relevant. Cultural memory also informs moral reflection. Stories emphasize ethical dilemmas, civilian suffering, and the consequences of ideological extremism. By engaging with these narratives, societies confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior, resilience, and the fragility of civilization. Through literature, film, photography, and digital media, the Second World War remains present in the public consciousness. Memory is curated, interpreted, and shared, ensuring that history continues to guide moral, cultural, and political understanding. The war's influence on storytelling shapes how humanity remembers itself, confronts trauma, and honors the endurance of courage across time and place. 1945 and the following decades. The Second World War leaves enduring effects on political systems, social structures, and global governance, shaping the modern world in ways both visible and subtle. Nations, societies, and individuals grapple with consequences that extend far beyond immediate post-war reconstruction. In Europe, governments rebuild amid ideological division. Western nations embrace democracy and market economies, investing in infrastructure, education, and social welfare to prevent the societal collapse witnessed during the war. Eastern Europe, under Soviet influence, implements centrally planned economies and authoritarian political systems, creating enduring social and political divides that define the Cold War. In Asia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan experience reconstruction driven by Allied occupation, economic reform, and industrial modernization. These nations transform former militaristic structures into democratic institutions or technocratic governments, focusing on economic recovery and long-term stability. China faces civil conflict and eventual communist consolidation, further reshaping governance and regional power dynamics. Globally, decolonization accelerates. Nations in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia assert independence, challenging former imperial powers weakened by wartime exhaustion. Nationalist movements, inspired by the principles of self-determination and human rights emphasized after the war. reshaped geopolitics and international relations for decades. Societal norms are permanently altered. Women maintain increased participation in the workforce, reshaping gender roles and family structures. Urbanization, population displacement, and migration patterns shift as cities rebuild and refugees resettle. Education and public policy incorporate lessons on tolerance, citizenship, and the ethical responsibilities of individuals and governments. International institutions grow in prominence. The United Nations, NATO, and other organizations institutionalize collective security, human rights, and cooperative governance. Legal frameworks, including conventions against genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, emerge as binding standards for global accountability. Technological and scientific advances developed during the war continue to shape economies and societies. Aviation, computing, medicine, and nuclear technology drive progress while serving as reminders of the dual-edged potential of human innovation. Ethical debates surrounding their use become central to governance, scientific research, and public policy. Culturally, the memory of total war informs national identity, historical education, and collective consciousness. Literature, film, museums, and public ceremonies perpetuate lessons of resilience, morality, and human endurance, ensuring that the consequences of conflict remain present in civic life and political thought. The Second World War, though concluded in 1945, leaves societies forever altered. Governance, social structures, technology, and culture evolve under its shadow. The war's long-term consequences shape the trajectory of nations, influence international norms, and provide enduring lessons about human capacity for both destruction and renewal. 1939–1945, and the subsequent decades. The Second World War acts as an unprecedented accelerator of technological advancement and industrial innovation, reshaping economies, military strategy, and civilian life. The urgency of total war drives experimentation, mass production, and the application of scientific research on a scale never before seen. In weaponry, advancements are immediate and transformative. Jet engines, long-range bombers, and mechanized armor redefine mobility and firepower on the battlefield. The development and deployment of nuclear weapons demonstrate the destructive potential of science, reshaping military doctrine and global diplomacy. Guided missiles, radar systems, and sonar technology alter naval and air engagements, laying the foundation for modern military strategy. Medicine experiences radical progress. Penicillin and other antibiotics mass-produced for soldiers save countless lives and become staples of post-war healthcare. Surgical techniques, triage systems, and trauma care improve dramatically, with lessons from battlefield hospitals influencing civilian medical infrastructure. Psychological understanding of combat stress also evolves, informing post-war treatment for veterans. Industry transforms under wartime necessity. Assembly lines expand for tanks, aircraft, and munitions, increasing efficiency and standardization. These methods transition into civilian manufacturing, fueling economic recovery and post-war growth. Logistics, supply chain management, and resource allocation techniques developed during the conflict redefine global commerce. Computing and communications advance rapidly. Code-breaking machines, early computers, and encryption devices developed for intelligence purposes pave the way for modern computing. Telecommunications, navigation systems, and early satellite technology emerge from military applications, becoming integral to global infrastructure. Energy and materials science also progress. Synthetic fuels, improved metallurgy, and chemical innovations arise from wartime scarcity and strategic need. These breakthroughs influence industrial processes, transportation, and civilian technology for decades after the war. Cultural and societal implications of technological change are profound. Civilians experience air raids, rationing, and mass mobilization, creating expectations for efficient production, communication, and innovation in peacetime. Governments and industries adopt wartime practices for reconstruction and modernization, accelerating economic growth and social development. The Second World War demonstrates that total conflict drives both destruction and invention. Its technological and industrial legacy transforms military capability, civilian life, and global economies, illustrating the dual-edged nature of innovation when human ingenuity is applied under the pressures of existential struggle. 1939–1945, and the years that follow. The Second World War leaves profound marks not only on human societies, but on the physical environment and demographic structures of the globe. Cities, rural landscapes, and ecosystems bear the scars of bombings, occupation, and military activity, while population shifts and losses reshape communities for generations. In Europe, entire cities are leveled. Warsaw, Dresden, and Stalingrad are reduced to rubble, with historic architecture destroyed and infrastructure decimated. Forests and fields are scarred by trenches, bomb craters, and fortifications. Rivers are dammed or diverted to support military operations, while farmland suffers from contamination, mines, and the destruction of irrigation systems. In Asia, urban centers such as Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki are obliterated by firebombing and atomic strikes. Rural areas face famine, displacement, and the collapse of traditional agricultural systems. Landscapes of the Pacific Islands are altered by battles, fortifications, and naval engagements, leaving enduring physical and ecological consequences. The war also causes mass demographic upheaval. Millions of civilians are displaced by conflict, occupation, and border changes. Refugee crises in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East reshape populations, forcing migrations, resettlements, and demographic reorganization. Families are fractured, and communities are permanently altered by the movement and loss of people. Casualties are staggering. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians die, with populations in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and China particularly devastated. The gender balance in many countries shifts, influencing post-war labor, family structures, and social roles. The loss of a generation of men profoundly affects population growth, inheritance, and community structures for decades. Ecosystems suffer. Bombings, chemical use, deforestation, and the movement of troops and vehicles disrupt wildlife and soil fertility. Coastal regions are littered with sunken ships and unexploded ordnance, while industrial areas contaminated by munitions and wartime production experience long-term environmental degradation. Recovery is gradual, cities are rebuilt, forests regrow. And agricultural systems are restored, but scars remain, both visible and invisible. Monuments, cemeteries, and preserved battlefields serve as reminders of human and environmental cost. Demographic recovery is uneven, with some regions facing persistent population deficits, altered urbanization, and migration patterns that continue to influence social and economic development. The Second World War demonstrates the interconnectedness of human conflict and the environment. Landscapes are transformed, populations reshaped, and the interplay of destruction and recovery defines post-war society. Understanding these consequences informs reconstruction, urban planning, and policies aimed at preventing similar devastation in future conflicts. 1939–1945 and the decades that follow. Beyond physical destruction, the Second World War leaves profound psychological wounds that shape individuals, families, and entire societies. Trauma manifests in ways both immediate and long-lasting, affecting mental health, social cohesion, and cultural memory. Soldiers returning from frontlines carry the burden of combat stress, witnessing death, injury, and destruction on a massive scale. Many suffer from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, and emotional numbness. Medical and psychological services struggle to address these invisible wounds, influencing the development of modern mental health care. Civilians endure equally profound psychological strain. Bombing raids, occupation, forced labor, and the threat of violence create pervasive fear. Children grow up in shelters, cities in ruins, and families torn apart. Survivors of genocide, concentration camps, and mass executions carry trauma that extends across generations, influencing parenting, education, and community life. Societal trauma is compounded by loss and displacement. Refugee populations, returning prisoners of war, and relocated communities must navigate grief, social reintegration, and economic hardship. Trust in institutions, neighbors, and authority is often strained, affecting political stability and social cohesion. Cultural expression becomes a mechanism for processing trauma. Literature, theater, film, and art depict experiences of fear, loss, and resilience, allowing societies to confront and communicate suffering. Memoirs, survivor testimonies, and oral histories preserve collective memory while serving as therapeutic outlets for trauma. War crimes and atrocities leave ethical and moral scars. Populations grapple with complicity, guilt, and the consequences of witnessing or participating in violence. Reconciliation efforts, truth commissions, and educational programs attempt to address these moral dimensions, highlighting the need for accountability and social healing. The post-war period sees increased recognition of psychological consequences in both policy and healthcare. Veterans programs, mental health initiatives, and community support systems develop to address long-term effects, acknowledging that recovery extends beyond physical reconstruction. The Second World War demonstrates that the consequences of total conflict are not confined to physical destruction. Psychological and societal trauma shape post-war generations, influence cultural memory, and inform policies on mental health, human rights, and education. Healing, resilience, and reflection become central to rebuilding not only nations but the human spirit itself. 1945 onward. The aftermath of the Second World War compels the global community to confront the legal and moral vacuum exposed by unprecedented atrocities. Governments, jurists, and international organizations collaborate to create frameworks aimed at preventing future conflicts and protecting human dignity. The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials establish legal precedents, defining crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against peace. These trials assert that individuals, including heads of state and military commanders, can be held accountable for systematic atrocities. The principle of individual responsibility becomes a cornerstone of modern international law. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights codifies fundamental rights and freedoms, articulating the rights of every individual irrespective of nationality, race, or religion. This milestone provides a universal standard for dignity, equality, and protection, influencing constitutions, legislation, and judicial systems worldwide. The Genocide Convention, adopted the same year, addresses mass extermination and persecution, criminalizing actions that seek to destroy entire communities. Legal definitions, enforcement mechanisms, and international cooperation are emphasized to ensure that mass atrocities are no longer treated as internal matters beyond the reach of global justice. The United Nations Charter establishes a framework for collective security, conflict resolution, and human rights advocacy. Peacekeeping operations, humanitarian interventions, and diplomatic mediation become instruments to prevent repetition of total war-scale devastation. Member states are bound to cooperate in promoting security, development, and respect for human life. Post-war tribunals and commissions influence the creation of permanent institutions, including the International Court of Justice and later the International Criminal Court. Legal scholars and policymakers draw on wartime experiences to craft procedures, evidence standards, and enforcement strategies capable of addressing complex global crimes. Education and public awareness complement legal frameworks. Historical documentation, survivor testimonies, and archival preservation inform lawmaking, societal norms, and civic responsibility. Nations incorporate lessons from total war to strengthen domestic legal systems, prevent authoritarianism, and protect minority populations. The Second World War thus catalyzes the codification of global norms. International law and human rights frameworks emerge not only as responses to past atrocities, but as tools to guide future conduct. Justice, prevention, and moral accountability become intertwined in a global system designed to mitigate the horrors of total conflict and affirm the value of human life. 1945 and continuing through the decades. The Second World War serves as a profound teacher, offering lessons that extend far beyond strategy, diplomacy, or politics. Its legacy emphasizes the importance of vigilance, ethical responsibility, and the preservation of memory to safeguard future generations from repeating past mistakes. Education becomes central. Schools, universities, and public programs teach not only the chronology of battles but the human, moral, and societal dimensions of total war. Students study the Holocaust, the bombings of cities, and resistance movements, learning that choices under extreme conditions carry consequences that echo across decades. Ethics and morality emerge as crucial guides. Leaders, civilians, and societies grapple with questions of obedience, complicity, and conscience. Lessons from total war stress that legal authority does not absolve moral responsibility and that individual actions can influence the fate of communities, nations, and humanity itself. Civic engagement and democratic participation are reinforced as safeguards. The rise and fall of totalitarian regimes demonstrate that political vigilance is necessary to protect freedoms, human rights, and pluralistic societies. Citizens learn to question authority, advocate for justice, and resist ideologies that seek to dehumanize others. Memory becomes a moral and cultural obligation. Museums, memorials, literature, and media preserve the stories of both victims and heroes. First-hand accounts, photographs, and archives are transmitted to ensure that history remains vivid, personal, and instructive. Commemorative ceremonies and anniversaries reinforce collective responsibility to remember and act. Technological and social innovations are also contextualized within ethical frameworks. Nuclear energy, industrial automation, and medical advancements are understood as tools with dual potential, capable of immense benefit or catastrophic harm. Ethical deliberation, regulation, and international cooperation are emphasized to prevent misuse. The war's lessons inform diplomacy and international relations. Alliances, treaties, and global institutions are constructed to mediate conflicts, promote peace, and address human rights violations proactively. Generations are taught that security is not achieved solely through force but through cooperation, ethical governance, and mutual respect among nations. Ultimately, the Second World War teaches that vigilance, morality, and memory are interdependent. Knowledge of history, ethical awareness, and active remembrance empower societies to confront challenges, resist injustice, and cultivate resilience. These lessons remain vital, guiding humanity to navigate the complex moral and political landscapes shaped by the experiences of total. 1945 and the years that follow. As the guns fall silent and nations rebuild, the human capacity for endurance, compassion, and moral reckoning becomes the defining feature of the post-war era. Total war leaves scars, but it also illuminates the depths of resilience and the potential for renewal. Survivors, veterans, and civilians carry both grief and wisdom. Their experiences inform political decisions, ethical debates, and cultural narratives. Communities reconstruct cities, families, and social institutions, striving to transform loss into learning and destruction into opportunity. Societies confront the moral complexities revealed by the war. Questions of justice, accountability, and complicity shape domestic policy and international law. Governments institutionalize protections against tyranny, discrimination, and mass violence, embedding lessons from the past into governance and public consciousness. Humanity's response to war demonstrates adaptability. Economies transition from military production to civilian innovation. Technology developed for destruction finds applications in medicine, transportation, and communication, and education emphasizes ethics alongside practical knowledge. Social roles, particularly for women and minorities, evolve in recognition of their contributions during wartime, permanently reshaping societies. Memory becomes a shared responsibility. Monuments, museums, archives, and oral histories preserve both heroism and suffering. Cultural expressions, literature, film, art, and music transform personal and collective experiences into enduring lessons. Education ensures that future generations grasp the consequences of extremism, the costs of conflict, and the importance of moral courage. The legacy of total war is dual, a warning and a guide. Humanity learns the capacity for destruction, the fragility of societies, and the consequences of hatred and unchecked power. Simultaneously, it learns the potential for resilience, solidarity, and ethical action in the face of unimaginable adversity. The Second World War shapes global consciousness, international institutions, and cultural memory. Its story is a continuous reminder that vigilance, compassion, and moral responsibility are essential for preserving peace. Humanity after total war is defined not only by what was destroyed, but by the courage, endurance, and wisdom cultivated in its aftermath. 1945 and continuing into the modern era. The legacy of the Second World War instills a persistent awareness that peace is neither automatic nor guaranteed. Nations, communities, and individuals embrace vigilance as a central principle, understanding that freedom and stability must be actively defended. Global institutions emerge as guardians of collective security. The United Nations, regional alliances, and international courts monitor conflicts, mediate disputes, and establish norms to prevent aggression. Peacekeeping missions deploy in volatile regions, balancing diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and when necessary, defensive action to protect civilians and uphold international law. Education and remembrance reinforce vigilance. Schools, museums, and public commemorations emphasize the lessons of total war, teaching citizens to recognize signs of extremism, propaganda, and erosion of civil liberties. Survivor testimonies and archival materials personalize history, ensuring that abstract events are connected to real human suffering and courage. Civil society plays a crucial role. Activists, journalists, and NGOs advocate for human rights, disarmament, and conflict prevention. Their work reflects a global commitment to applying the lessons of total war to contemporary crises, reminding governments and populations that peace requires ongoing effort. Cultural memory sustains moral awareness. Literature, film, theater, and art depict both the horrors of war and the resilience of human spirit, cultivating empathy, reflection, and ethical understanding. These narratives inspire vigilance by demonstrating the consequences of indifference, hatred, and authoritarianism. Technological advancement is guided by ethical consideration. Nuclear energy, artificial intelligence, and industrial innovation carry both potential and risk. Societies learn to balance progress with responsibility, understanding that the tools of human ingenuity can protect or destroy, depending on the choices made. The eternal vigil is both individual and collective. Citizens are called to participate in democratic processes, uphold human rights, and foster social cohesion. Nations must maintain preparedness without succumbing to fear, promoting security while respecting liberty. Through vigilance, education, and cultural preservation, the memory of World War II continues to shape global consciousness. Humanity learns that peace is an achievement requiring constant care, informed by history, sustained by moral responsibility, and protected by collective action. 1945 and the present. The Second World War becomes a touchstone for intergenerational responsibility, uniting people across nations through the shared duty to remember, reflect, and act to prevent future conflict. Collective memory transforms into a mechanism for social cohesion, ethical guidance, and global solidarity. Families preserve stories of survival, heroism, and loss, passing them to children and grandchildren. Oral histories, letters, and photographs provide intimate perspectives, ensuring that personal experiences complement public records and historical scholarship. The act of remembrance becomes both a moral and cultural inheritance. Communities organize memorials, ceremonies, and educational programs that emphasize human resilience, ethical decision-making, and the consequences of violence. National days of remembrance and local observances cultivate shared understanding, bridging divides between generations and cultures. International initiatives further foster unity. Museums, educational exchanges, and collaborative research projects connect societies around the world, emphasizing common values and lessons learned from total war. Students engage with history not as abstract events but as lived experiences that inform contemporary responsibilities. The ethical dimension of remembrance guides civic life. Lessons on complicity, courage, and moral choice are integrated into curricula, public discourse, and cultural expression. Citizens are encouraged to recognize the consequences of apathy, intolerance, and hatred, reinforcing the principle that preventing atrocities requires vigilance and proactive engagement. Cultural expression amplifies intergenerational dialogue. Literature, film, theater, and digital media reinterpret wartime experiences for modern audiences, connecting historical events to contemporary moral, social, and political challenges. These narratives foster empathy, critical reflection, and a commitment to ethical action. Unity through remembrance ensures that the past shapes the present and informs the future. Shared responsibility transcends borders, creating a global culture of memory, vigilance, and moral accountability. By preserving and transmitting the lessons of the Second World War, societies cultivate resilience, solidarity, and the enduring commitment to peace across generations. 1945 and the decades following. In the aftermath of total war, humanity confronts the enormous task of reconstruction, physical, social, and moral. Cities lie in ruins, economies are shattered, and populations are traumatized, yet the drive to restore life, community, and dignity becomes a defining feature of the post-war era. Urban centers across Europe and Asia are rebuilt from rubble. Architects, engineers, and planners combine modern techniques with historical preservation, reconstructing homes, infrastructure, and public spaces while honoring memory. Streets once scarred by shelling and bombings are transformed into centers of civic life, commerce, and culture. Economies transition from wartime production to peacetime growth. Industrial capacity, honed for efficiency and scale during conflict, is redirected toward consumer goods, transportation, and infrastructure development. Agricultural systems are restored to feed populations, incorporating innovations in mechanization, irrigation, and resource management developed during wartime necessity. Social structures adapt to post-war realities. Women who maintained economies and communities during the war remain integral to labor forces and civic engagement. Families reconfigure amid loss and displacement, while communities support reintegration of soldiers, refugees, and displaced persons. Education expands to address both academic needs and moral development, emphasizing tolerance, ethics, and civic responsibility. Governments implement policies to prevent recurrence of total conflict. Democratic institutions, legal frameworks, and international cooperation guide reconstruction, with social welfare programs, public health initiatives, and housing efforts addressing the needs of survivors. Citizens engage in civic life, contributing to stability, governance, and social cohesion. Cultural resilience emerges alongside material reconstruction. Literature, theater, music, and visual arts reflect on loss, endurance, and human ingenuity. Memorials and museums preserve memory, while creative expression allows societies to process trauma and celebrate the triumph of human spirit over devastation. The rebuilding of humanity is both tangible and intangible. Physical infrastructure, social institutions, and cultural memory intertwine, forming a foundation for resilience. Lessons of endurance, moral courage, and collective responsibility guide societies, ensuring that the experience of total war shapes reconstruction not only of cities and economies, but of the human spirit itself. 1945 to the present day. The consequences of the Second World War ripple through global politics, culture, and society, influencing decisions, relationships, and identities decades after the final battles. The war remains a benchmark for understanding power, morality, and the human condition. Geopolitically, the war reshaped alliances, borders, and global influence. The United States and the Soviet Union emerge as superpowers, their rivalry defining the Cold War. Former colonies gain independence, redrawing maps and creating new nations whose political systems and international relations are profoundly influenced by wartime experience and post-war reconstruction. Military strategy and technology continue to reflect lessons learned during the conflict. Modern doctrines emphasize rapid mobilization, combined arms coordination, and the ethical use of technology. Nuclear strategy, intelligence gathering, and logistics all trace origins to innovations developed under the pressures of total war. International law and human rights frameworks, forged in response to atrocities, guide contemporary governance. The Nuremberg Principles, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Genocide Convention establish standards still applied in tribunals, peacekeeping missions, and human rights advocacy worldwide. These principles influence responses to conflict, humanitarian crises, and state conduct today. Culturally, the war remains central to education, media, and collective memory. Films, literature, and digital archives preserve stories of courage, suffering, and resilience. Museums and memorials continue to educate new generations, ensuring that the moral, ethical, and human lessons of total war remain vivid and relevant. Societal structures reflect enduring impacts. Women's workforce participation, technological advancement, urban planning, and public health systems often evolved as direct responses to wartime needs. The war accelerated social change, fostering innovation, gender equity, and civic engagement that persist in modern institutions. Memory and commemoration maintain vigilance against repetition. Annual observances, historical research, and survivor testimonies remind societies of the costs of extremism, authoritarianism, and hatred. These practices cultivate moral awareness, empathy, and global responsibility. The ongoing legacy of World War II is both tangible and intangible. It shapes governance, technology, law, culture, and collective consciousness. Humanity's understanding of conflict, resilience, and morality continues to be informed by the war, ensuring that its lessons remain a living guide for navigating the complexities of the modern world. 1945 to the present. Education becomes a vital instrument in preserving the memory and lessons of World War II. Classrooms, curricula, and academic research focus not only on dates and battles but on human experiences, moral choices, and societal consequences, ensuring that history informs future generations. Teachers incorporate survivor testimonies, archival footage, and primary documents to convey the realities of occupation, resistance, and civilian life. Students engage with stories of heroism, loss, and ethical dilemmas, learning to analyze decisions under extreme conditions and the consequences of ideological extremism. Museums, libraries, and digital archives complement formal education. Interactive exhibits, virtual reality reconstructions, and curated collections immerse learners in historical contexts, bridging the gap between abstract knowledge and lived experience. Ethical reflection is emphasized alongside factual understanding, fostering critical thinking and empathy. International educational programs encourage cross-cultural dialogue. Exchanges, collaborative projects, and global curricula highlight shared responsibility, illustrating how collective memory can transcend national boundaries and promote understanding among diverse populations. Commemoration is integrated into school life, anniversaries of key events. Visits to memorials and discussions of moral responsibility cultivate awareness of both the human cost of war and the importance of vigilance, tolerance, and ethical action in contemporary society. By embedding the lessons of total war into education, societies ensure that history is not forgotten. Knowledge, empathy, and moral awareness become tools to prevent the recurrence of atrocities, empowering future generations to uphold peace, justice, and human dignity. 1945 to the present. The legacy of the Second World War extends beyond national boundaries, inspiring international efforts to preserve memory, document experiences, and foster understanding among diverse populations. Global initiatives ensure that the lessons of total war remain accessible, accurate, and ethically framed. International museums and memorials, from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial in Japan, serve as repositories of evidence, artifacts, and personal stories. These institutions provide spaces for reflection, education, and dialogue, connecting local histories to global consequences. Archives and digital platforms expand access to historical records. Governments, universities, and organizations collaborate to digitize documents, photographs, and audiovisual material, enabling worldwide research, teaching, and storytelling. Interactive databases allow students, scholars, and the public to explore wartime experiences with unprecedented depth and nuance. Collaborative initiatives between countries promote reconciliation and shared memory. Joint exhibitions, cultural exchanges, and commemorative projects bridge former divisions, emphasizing common humanity and mutual responsibility. By confronting difficult histories collectively, nations strengthen diplomatic relations and foster global solidarity. International observances and remembrance days create shared experiences. Events such as Holocaust Remembrance Day and Victory in Europe Day engage diverse communities, reinforcing the moral imperatives of vigilance, tolerance, and human rights protection. These occasions cultivate empathy, historical awareness, and civic responsibility across generations. Educational programs accompanying these initiatives emphasize critical thinking, ethical reflection, and historical accuracy. Students examine causes, consequences, and human choices, connecting past experiences to contemporary challenges such as extremism, authoritarianism, and mass violence. Through global memory initiatives, the Second World War becomes a shared heritage of humanity. By preserving history across borders, societies uphold collective responsibility, reinforce ethical consciousness, and ensure that the lessons of total war remain a guiding force for peace, justice, and moral action worldwide. 1939, 1945, and beyond. The technological advancements of the Second World War leave a legacy that extends into both military and civilian life. Preserving, studying, and interpreting these innovations becomes a critical task for historians, engineers, and educators seeking to understand their impact on modern society. Military technologies, including tanks, aircraft, radar systems, and code-breaking machines, are preserved in museums and specialized collections. Detailed documentation, schematics, and restored equipment allow researchers to study design, engineering, and tactical application, providing insight into the evolution of modern warfare. Nuclear technology, initially developed for war, is documented extensively to analyze both its destructive potential and its peaceful applications. Archives, declassified reports, and scientific records track experimentation, deployment, and ethical debates, serving as case studies for responsible technological development. Civilian applications of wartime innovation, such as advances in aviation, computing, medicine, and communications, are traced through archives and educational programs. Engineers and scientists study these developments to understand the translation of military innovation into peacetime benefit, shaping industries and economies worldwide. Digital preservation ensures accessibility for global audiences. Online databases, 3D models, and virtual simulations allow students, historians, and enthusiasts to interact with historical technology, explore its function, and analyze its influence on both historical outcomes and modern systems. Interpretation emphasizes context, ethics, and human consequences. Exhibits and educational programs highlight how technological breakthroughs shaped the course of the war, affected civilian populations, and presented moral dilemmas. These lessons inform contemporary debates about innovation, dual-use technology, and ethical responsibility. Through technological preservation and interpretation, the innovations of World War II continue to educate, inspire, and guide future generations. The study of these advancements ensures that both the ingenuity and the ethical dimensions of total war remain integral to historical understanding and contemporary decision-making. 1939–1945, and the decades that follow. The Second World War profoundly shapes culture, inspiring artists, writers, filmmakers, and musicians to interpret, document, and reflect on the human experience of total conflict. This cultural continuum preserves memory, explores morality, and conveys the emotional and psychological dimensions of war. Literature emerges as a primary medium for personal and collective reflection. Memoirs, novels, and poetry convey experiences of soldiers, civilians, and survivors, capturing fear, resilience, and ethical dilemmas. Works by authors such as Anne Frank, Primo Levi, and Kurt Vonnegut provide intimate insights into survival, persecution, and the absurdity of violence. Film and television dramatize historical events, blending documentary footage with narrative storytelling. Productions recreate battles, resistance efforts, and civilian life, immersing audiences in both strategic and emotional realities. Documentaries, interviews with veterans, and archival material ensure historical accuracy while emphasizing human consequences. Visual arts interpret war through painting, sculpture, photography, and installation. Iconic photographs, sketches from the front lines, and artistic depictions of destruction and hope communicate experiences beyond words, providing visceral connections to events, places, and people affected by conflict. Music and theater serve as avenues for both mourning and resilience. Compositions and performances memorialize loss, celebrate survival, and explore the ethical and emotional complexities of war. Cultural expression becomes a means to process trauma, educate audiences, and inspire reflection across generations. Media and digital platforms expand the reach of cultural preservation. Interactive exhibits, virtual reality experiences, and online archives allow global audiences to engage with historical narratives, connecting personal stories to broader historical and moral contexts. Through art, literature, and media, the Second World War remains a living cultural force. These expressions preserve memory, interpret human experience, and maintain ethical awareness, ensuring that the lessons and consequences of total war continue to resonate and guide contemporary societies. 1939–1945 and the post-war era. The Second World War accelerates scientific discovery and medical advancement, driven by the urgent needs of soldiers and civilians. These innovations save lives, improve public health, and shape technological and medical development for decades. Medical advancements emerge from battlefield necessity. Surgical techniques, trauma care, and emergency response systems are refined under extreme conditions. Penicillin and other antibiotics mass-produced for wartime use dramatically reduce mortality from infection, laying the foundation for modern medicine. Psychological understanding advances as well. Recognition of combat stress, shell shock, and trauma informs treatments for veterans and civilians. Early psychiatric interventions evolve into systematic approaches for mental health care, influencing public policy and clinical practice worldwide. Nutrition, epidemiology, and preventive medicine expand under wartime pressures. Rationing, resource management, and disease prevention campaigns highlight the relationship between population health and logistical efficiency. Post-war, these lessons inform national health programs and global medical initiatives. Scientific research during the war also accelerates innovation. Nuclear physics, aerodynamics, radar technology, and materials science advance rapidly. These breakthroughs are adapted for civilian applications, including energy production, aviation, computing, and communication systems. Ethical considerations accompany scientific progress. The dual-use nature of many wartime innovations, capable of both destruction and societal benefit, fuels debates on responsibility, oversight, and the moral dimensions of research. Educational programs and policy frameworks emerge to guide ethical application of technology. The scientific and medical legacies of World War II demonstrate the transformative potential of necessity. Innovation driven by conflict reshapes human capacity for healing, problem-solving, and technological advancement, leaving enduring benefits while reminding societies of the ethical responsibilities inherent in discovery. 1945 and the subsequent decades. The Second World War transforms economic structures, requiring nations to shift from total war production to sustainable peacetime growth. The reconstruction process reshapes industries, labor markets, and global trade networks, leaving lasting impacts on economic development. In Europe, the Marshall Plan provides financial aid, technological support, and investment to rebuild war-torn economies. Factories, transportation networks, and urban infrastructure are restored and modernized, enabling rapid industrial recovery and fostering regional cooperation. In Asia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan transition from militarized economies to industrial and technological hubs. Economic reform, foreign assistance, and strategic planning facilitate rapid modernization, export-driven growth, and the development of global trade partnerships. Labor markets adapt to post-war realities. Women who had entered the workforce during wartime continue to participate in economies, transforming gender dynamics and social expectations. Veterans are reintegrated through employment programs, skills training, and government support, stabilizing communities and stimulating economic activity. Technological and industrial innovations developed during the war are applied to peacetime production. Assembly line techniques, logistics systems, and mechanization improve efficiency across sectors, while research in materials, chemistry, and engineering drives new industries. Global trade networks expand as nations rebuild. International cooperation, tariff agreements, and economic organizations foster recovery and interdependence, reducing the likelihood of conflict while promoting prosperity. Markets, currency stabilization, and investment programs accelerate reconstruction and long-term growth. The reconstruction of global economies demonstrates the interconnection of human resilience, technological innovation, and international collaboration. The shift from war production to peacetime development not only restores prosperity, but also establishes the foundation for the modern global economy, illustrating how societies transform the tools and lessons of conflict into engines for progress. 1945 and the decades that follow. The aftermath of the Second World War reshapes social structures, community dynamics, and cultural norms. Societies confront the consequences of mass mobilization, population displacement, and wartime trauma, forging new identities and values in the process. Women's roles evolve dramatically. Having sustained economies and communities during the war, women maintain increased workforce participation, pursue higher education, and assert greater influence in political and civic life. Gender norms are challenged, laying the groundwork for movements advocating equality and empowerment. Families and communities adapt to loss and displacement. Orphans, refugees, and returning soldiers reshape domestic life, while social services, public housing, and welfare programs address the needs of vulnerable populations. Collective experiences of survival foster solidarity and civic responsibility. Education expands to meet societal demands. Curricula emphasize literacy, vocational skills, civic engagement, and ethical awareness. Lessons from the war, including tolerance, human rights, and civic duty, are integrated into teaching, fostering generations capable of critical thought and moral reflection. Urbanization and migration reshape populations. Cities destroyed by bombings are rebuilt with modern infrastructure, influencing social interactions, community organization, and access to services. Migration patterns, both voluntary and forced, diversify societies, fostering cultural exchange and reshaping demographics. Arts, literature, and media reflect social change. Cultural productions explore trauma, resilience, and human experience, influencing public perception and identity formation. Theater, music, and film become vehicles for dialogue, remembrance, and moral reflection. The social transformations of the post-war era illustrate humanity's capacity to adapt and rebuild. Communities, families, and individuals leverage the lessons of total war to create resilient societies, embedding ethical awareness, civic engagement, and cultural memory into the fabric of everyday life. 1945 and beyond. The devastation of the Second World War compels nations to collaborate on unprecedented levels, creating institutions designed to maintain peace, mediate disputes, and uphold human rights. International cooperation becomes both a strategy for stability and a moral imperative. The United Nations emerges as a central platform for diplomacy, conflict resolution, and humanitarian coordination. Its charter enshrines principles of collective security, sovereign equality, and the protection of fundamental human rights, setting standards for global governance and international law. Regional alliances, such as NATO and the European Coal and Steel Community, exemplify efforts to bind nations together economically and militarily, reducing the likelihood of armed conflict through interdependence and shared security commitments. Cooperative frameworks extend to trade, scientific research, and cultural exchange, reinforcing stability across multiple domains. International legal systems gain prominence. The International Court of Justice and tribunals address disputes, enforce treaties, and uphold accountability for war crimes, establishing mechanisms to deter aggression and promote justice. Legal frameworks codify lessons from wartime atrocities, ensuring that violations of human dignity are universally recognized and actionable. Humanitarian organizations and NGOs expand their roles, providing disaster relief, refugee assistance, and development support. Global collaboration in public health, food security, and education strengthens resilience in regions affected by conflict, famine, and displacement. Education and public awareness programs reinforce the principles of cooperation. Curricula, conferences, and exchanges cultivate understanding across borders, teaching citizens to value diplomacy, mutual responsibility, and ethical engagement in global affairs. The construction of international institutions demonstrates humanity's commitment to learning from total war. Cooperation becomes a preventative force, embedding norms, accountability, and shared responsibility into the structures of global society, ensuring that the lessons of World War II inform governance, diplomacy, and collective action for generations. 1939–1945 and the post-war decades. The scale and consequences of total war underscore the necessity of moral responsibility and ethical leadership. Societies recognize that decisions made by individuals, institutions, and nations can have profound and lasting effects, shaping the course of history and the fate of millions. Political and military leaders are held accountable through tribunals, commissions, and historical scrutiny. The principles established at Nuremberg and Tokyo demonstrate that authority does not exempt one from ethical obligations, emphasizing that leadership carries both power and moral duty. Civic education emphasizes ethics alongside history. Students explore dilemmas faced by leaders, civilians, and resistors, analyzing choices under extreme circumstances. Lessons focus on courage, integrity, and the consequences of complicity, encouraging reflection on the moral dimensions of human action. Institutions integrate ethical frameworks into governance, law, and public policy. Democratic systems, international organizations, and oversight bodies are designed to prevent abuses of power, protect vulnerable populations, and guide decision-making with accountability and transparency. Cultural narratives reinforce ethical awareness. Literature, film, and art depict the moral complexities of wartime decisions, illustrating both heroism and failure. By engaging with these narratives, societies cultivate empathy, discernment, and a commitment to justice. Ethical leadership extends to contemporary challenges. Policymakers, military strategists, and civic leaders apply lessons from total war to conflicts, humanitarian crises, and governance dilemmas. Responsibility, foresight, and moral courage become essential qualities for preventing repetition of past atrocities. The Second World War teaches that moral responsibility and ethical leadership are not abstract ideals but practical necessities. By embedding these principles in education, governance, and culture, future generations are equipped to navigate complex decisions with conscience, foresight, and commitment to human dignity. 1945 to the present. The Second World War becomes a central component of collective memory, influencing national identities, cultural narratives, and the ways societies interpret history. Memory is curated, transmitted, and debated, shaping how communities understand their past and define their future. Monuments, museums, and memorial sites preserve both individual and collective experiences. Cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Hiroshima maintain spaces where the horrors and heroism of war are commemorated, allowing citizens and visitors to engage with history directly. Oral histories and personal testimonies provide intimate perspectives. Survivors, veterans, and descendants share stories of endurance, loss, and moral choice, ensuring that human experiences complement official records and scholarly research. These narratives embed history into the consciousness of communities. Education systems incorporate historical reflection into civic identity. Curricula emphasize not only chronology and strategy but also ethics, human rights, and the consequences of extremism. Students explore moral responsibility, resilience, and the cost of hatred, linking historical knowledge to contemporary civic awareness. Cultural expression reinforces collective memory. Literature, theater, film, and visual arts interpret wartime experiences, illustrating both the devastation of conflict and the capacity for resilience. These mediums foster empathy, critical reflection, and intergenerational dialogue. Global initiatives promote shared remembrance. Cross-national collaborations, commemorative events, and digital archives create spaces for dialogue, reconciliation, and ethical engagement. Societies learn that memory is not passive but an active process shaping identity, responsibility, and global citizenship. By embedding the Second World War into collective memory, societies maintain moral awareness, strengthen cultural identity, and cultivate vigilance. Remembering becomes a tool not only for honoring the past but for guiding future generations toward ethical, informed, and compassionate action. 1939–1945 and the post-war decades. The unprecedented pace of scientific innovation during the Second World War creates both opportunity and ethical dilemmas. Societies confront the responsibility of applying knowledge gained under wartime pressures in ways that protect humanity and prevent misuse. Nuclear research exemplifies the dual-edged nature of innovation. The development of atomic weapons demonstrates immense destructive power, prompting post-war debates about proliferation, civilian protection, and the ethical limits of scientific endeavor. Policies and international treaties are established to govern nuclear technology responsibly. Medical research advances rapidly during wartime. Surgical techniques, antibiotics, and trauma care save countless lives but also raise questions about experimentation, consent, and equitable access. Post-war medical ethics codify principles ensuring that patient welfare and human rights guide research and treatment. Engineering, materials science, and communication technologies developed for military applications are adapted for civilian use. Radar, computing, aviation, and logistics systems revolutionize industries, infrastructure, and everyday life. Ethical frameworks are integrated to balance progress with societal well-being. Education in science and engineering emphasizes ethical responsibility. Students examine historical case studies, evaluating decisions made during wartime research and their consequences. The goal is to instill awareness of the societal, moral, and environmental impact of innovation. International cooperation reinforces ethical oversight. Collaborative research projects, regulatory bodies, and scientific communities adopt shared codes of conduct, ensuring that lessons from total war inform responsible technological and medical development worldwide. By integrating ethical reflection into the application of wartime innovations, societies transform the lessons of the Second World War into guiding principles. Science and technology become tools for progress, healing, and protection, rather than instruments of destruction, shaping the moral and practical landscape for generations to come. 1945 and the immediate post-war years. The conclusion of the Second World War reshapes global power dynamics, redrawing borders, establishing spheres of influence, and creating alliances that define international relations for decades. Nations navigate the delicate balance between sovereignty, cooperation, and security. Europe is divided between emerging superpowers. The United States and the Soviet Union dominate political, military, and economic influence, initiating a strategic rivalry that evolves into the Cold War. Germany, Austria, and Eastern Europe are partitioned, with occupation zones administered to ensure stability, denazification, and reconstruction. New alliances are formed to maintain collective security. NATO, formed in 1949, binds Western nations in defense cooperation, while the Warsaw Pact later unites Eastern Bloc countries under Soviet influence. These alliances create deterrence frameworks emphasizing coordinated defense, shared intelligence, and military preparedness. Decolonization accelerates globally. Former colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East assert independence, reshaping political landscapes and creating new nations with complex relationships to former imperial powers. Post-war reconstruction, economic aid, and international recognition guide transitions from colonial governance to sovereignty. United Nations mechanisms foster conflict resolution and diplomacy. International law, peacekeeping missions, and multilateral negotiations provide structures to manage disputes, promote human rights, and prevent escalation. Institutions like the International Court of Justice enforce legal norms established in response to wartime atrocities. Economic reconstruction and alliances intersect with geopolitics. Programs such as the Marshall Plan strengthen Western Europe economically and politically, consolidating alliances, stabilizing democracies, and countering the spread of authoritarian influence. Trade, aid, and investment become instruments of both recovery and strategic alignment. The post-war geopolitical realignment illustrates the interconnectedness of power, security, and moral responsibility. Borders, alliances, and institutions are designed not only to prevent conflict, but to institutionalize lessons learned from total war, ensuring that nations navigate global challenges with foresight, cooperation, and accountability. 1939–1945 and the post-war period. Total war leaves not only human and economic scars, but also profound environmental and urban consequences. Bombing campaigns, deforestation, and industrial mobilization devastate landscapes, requiring comprehensive reconstruction and ecological awareness. Cities across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific lie in ruins. Streets are littered with rubble, utilities destroyed, and housing shortages widespread. Urban planners and architects coordinate rebuilding efforts, integrating modern infrastructure with historical preservation to restore functionality while honoring memory. Industrial zones, factories, and ports require extensive remediation. Soil contamination, debris, and hazardous materials are cleared, allowing for safe industrial revival and the sustainable management of natural resources. Reconstruction strategies balance economic needs with environmental rehabilitation. Natural landscapes are altered by warfare. Forests are cut for timber, rivers redirected for military logistics, and agricultural lands exhausted by occupation or scorched earth tactics. Post-war efforts include reforestation, soil restoration, and reclamation projects to revive productivity and ecological stability. Urban planning incorporates lessons from destruction. Wider streets, improved sewage systems, public transportation networks, and green spaces reflect an understanding of resilience, efficiency, and quality of life. Cities are rebuilt not merely to replace what was lost but to prepare for future generations. Cultural and historical preservation accompanies environmental reconstruction. Monuments, memorials, and historically significant sites are restored or relocated thoughtfully, ensuring that urban landscapes convey both memory and functional purpose. The environmental and urban impacts of World War II demonstrate the intertwined nature of human activity, conflict, and ecological stewardship. Reconstruction emphasizes sustainability, resilience, and foresight, ensuring that the landscapes and cities shaped by war evolve into spaces capable of supporting life, memory, and progress. 1939–1945 and the post-war decades. The technological advancements developed for total war are adapted for civilian use, transforming industries, economies, and daily life. Innovations in engineering, communication, and logistics extend the impact of wartime ingenuity into peacetime society. Aviation technology advances dramatically. Aircraft designed for combat evolve into commercial airliners, revolutionizing transportation, global trade, and tourism. Aerodynamic research, navigation systems, and safety protocols derived from wartime experience set standards for modern flight. Computing and communications, accelerated by code breaking and strategic coordination, find civilian applications. Early electronic computers, initially developed for intelligence and logistics, become foundations for data processing, business management, and scientific research, ushering in the information age. Materials science and industrial processes are repurposed. High-strength alloys, synthetic fuels, and mass production techniques improve infrastructure, manufacturing, and consumer goods. The efficiency and scale developed during wartime enable rapid industrialization and economic growth. Medical and health-related technologies transition from battlefield necessity to public benefit. Advances in antibiotics, surgical techniques, and emergency response systems improve civilian healthcare, reducing mortality and establishing new standards for treatment and public health management. Energy systems and engineering solutions are adapted. Radar, nuclear research, and mechanical innovations enhance energy production, transportation, and communication networks, supporting urban development and industrial expansion worldwide. The diffusion of technology illustrates how lessons from conflict can catalyze societal advancement. Military innovations, when guided by ethical, practical, and civilian considerations, contribute to economic prosperity, quality of life, and scientific progress, demonstrating the enduring influence of World War II on modern society. 1939–1945 and the contemporary era. The scale and consequences of total war shape modern governance, emphasizing ethical responsibility, transparency, and accountability in leadership. Societies recognize that decisions made at the highest levels affect millions and that ethical reflection must guide policy, strategy, and international relations. Legislative frameworks incorporate lessons from wartime abuses. Human rights charters, anti-discrimination laws, and regulations on the use of force are designed to prevent repetition of atrocities, embedding moral considerations into the foundation of governance. Political leaders are educated in the consequences of unchecked power. Post-war institutions, civic education, and historical study cultivate awareness that authority carries responsibility, and that societal trust is maintained only through integrity, foresight, and ethical decision-making. Military and strategic planning integrates ethical oversight. Rules of engagement, civilian protection protocols, and humanitarian law guide operational decisions, ensuring that the lessons of total war inform both defensive and offensive actions in contemporary conflicts. International cooperation reinforces ethical governance. Treaties, alliances, and multilateral organizations establish shared standards of accountability, promoting diplomacy, conflict prevention, and the protection of vulnerable populations. Ethical reflection becomes central to maintaining stability, justice, and peace across borders. Civil society, media, and academia play a critical role in sustaining moral vigilance. Investigative reporting, civic advocacy, and scholarly research ensure that governmental decisions are scrutinized, debated, and aligned with principles derived from historical experience. By integrating ethical reflection into governance, societies transform the lessons of World War II into practical frameworks for leadership. Decision-makers are guided not only by strategy and law but by moral responsibility, ensuring that the choices of the present honor the memory and hard-earned lessons of total war. 1945 and the decades following. Communities across war-torn regions demonstrate extraordinary resilience, rebuilding social structures, institutions, and daily life while addressing trauma, displacement, and loss. Recovery is not solely physical, it encompasses cultural, emotional, and moral reconstruction. Neighborhoods devastated by bombing and occupation are restored through coordinated civic planning, labor mobilization, and community engagement. Schools, hospitals, and marketplaces are rebuilt, fostering the return of normalcy and social cohesion. Social networks adapt to post-war realities. Families cope with loss, refugees integrate into new communities, and civic organizations provide support for mental health, education, and employment. Collective action strengthens bonds and reinforces a sense of shared responsibility. Cultural initiatives aid emotional recovery. Local theaters, music ensembles, and art programs provide outlets for expression, commemoration, and reconciliation. Cultural engagement preserves memory while fostering hope and cohesion, demonstrating the central role of creativity in societal healing. Government policies support resilience through social welfare, housing programs, and labor reintegration. Veterans, displaced persons, and marginalized groups receive assistance, promoting equality and stability while preventing social fragmentation. Education emphasizes civic participation, moral reflection, and historical awareness. Communities learn from wartime experiences, cultivating values of tolerance, cooperation, and vigilance, ensuring that reconstruction encompasses ethical as well as practical dimensions. The reconstruction of communities after total war exemplifies humanity's capacity for resilience. Through coordinated effort, social support, and cultural engagement, societies rebuild not only infrastructure but the moral and social fabric necessary for long-term stability, cohesion, and ethical development. 1945 to the present. Societies commit to preserving the memory of the Second World War through ceremonies, monuments, and educational initiatives, ensuring that the experiences, sacrifices, and lessons of total war remain vivid across generations. National memorials honor those who fought and suffered, from soldiers on the front lines to civilians caught in sieges and bombings. Monuments, plaques, and preserved battlefields provide tangible reminders of the cost of conflict, fostering reflection and empathy. Commemorative ceremonies, anniversaries, and public observances reinforce collective memory. Citizens participate in rituals of remembrance, hear survivor testimonies, and engage with historical scholarship, creating a bridge between past events and contemporary ethical awareness. Education integrates memory into civic identity. Schools and universities emphasize not only the chronology of events but also the moral and human dimensions of total war, cultivating historical literacy, empathy, and ethical responsibility in students. Cultural preservation complements formal education. Literature, film, theater, and visual arts depict the complexities of human experience during war, highlighting heroism, moral choices, and the consequences of hatred. These narratives strengthen memory while providing accessible and emotional engagement. International initiatives promote shared remembrance. Cross-national programs, museums, and digital archives enable global audiences to explore wartime history, fostering reconciliation, understanding, and the recognition of universal human rights. By embedding memory and commemoration into culture, education, and civic life, societies ensure that the lessons of the Second World War endure. Remembering becomes both an act of respect and a tool for moral vigilance, guiding future generations in the pursuit of peace, justice, and human dignity. 1945 to the present. The scale of total war establishes a moral imperative. Societies must actively prevent the recurrence of large-scale conflict. Awareness, education, and civic engagement become essential tools in promoting peace, justice, and global responsibility. Civic institutions emphasize human rights, tolerance, and ethical governance. Legal frameworks, international agreements, and monitoring bodies are designed to deter aggression, protect vulnerable populations, and uphold accountability for violations of law and morality. Education fosters vigilance. Students learn the causes and consequences of total war, analyze decisions made by leaders and civilians, and explore the ethical dimensions of power, ideology, and societal responsibility. Historical awareness becomes a preventative measure against extremism and apathy. Civil society plays a proactive role. NGOs, media, and community organizations advocate for justice, monitor potential abuses, and engage in conflict prevention. Grassroots initiatives connect local action to global awareness, emphasizing that prevention requires participation at every level of society. Technological and scientific communities integrate ethical oversight. Innovations in weapons, communications, and industry are guided by moral reflection, ensuring that progress does not repeat the destructive consequences witnessed during total war. International cooperation reinforces the moral imperative. Diplomatic engagement, alliances, and multilateral organizations establish norms for peaceful resolution, ethical leadership, and shared responsibility. Collaboration across borders ensures that the lessons of history guide contemporary decision-making. By embedding awareness, education, and ethical action into governance, society transforms the memory of total war into a framework for prevention. The moral imperative arising from World War II is clear. Vigilance, responsibility, and proactive engagement are necessary to safeguard humanity from repeating the horrors of the past. 1945 to the present. The Second World War establishes a framework for understanding global responsibility, emphasizing that national actions, policies, and ideologies carry consequences beyond borders. Societies are tasked with balancing sovereignty, ethics, and international cooperation to ensure stability and human dignity. Economic interdependence becomes a mechanism for peace. International trade, development aid, and collaborative infrastructure projects connect nations, creating incentives for cooperation and reducing the likelihood of conflict. Lessons from wartime devastation inform strategies to prevent economic collapse and humanitarian crises. Environmental stewardship is recognized as a global responsibility. Wartime destruction highlights the fragility of ecosystems, prompting post-war initiatives in reforestation, urban planning, and sustainable development. Modern societies integrate ecological awareness into planning, resource management, and disaster response. Human rights and humanitarian law guide international conduct. Organizations monitor violations, provide relief to displaced populations, and enforce legal standards. The global community is increasingly accountable for ensuring the protection of civilians, refugees, and marginalized groups. Education and cultural exchange reinforce responsibility. Shared curricula, historical research, and international collaboration foster understanding of past conflicts, ethical decision-making, and the value of dialogue, empathy, and tolerance in a connected world. Technological and scientific communities carry lessons from WWII into contemporary practice. Innovation is coupled with ethical oversight, ensuring that progress supports human welfare rather than perpetuating destruction, reflecting the enduring impact of wartime experience on responsible global development. Global responsibility, informed by the lessons of the Second World War, emphasizes interconnectedness, vigilance, and proactive ethical engagement. Societies recognize that the choices of one nation can resonate worldwide, making collaboration, moral reflection, and shared accountability essential for maintaining peace and human dignity.